What is up, my friend? Happy Friday and welcome into episode 42 of Inside the 20 by Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. And like we do every Friday at noon Central, we are going live on the Basement Brewed Fantasy Football YouTube channel. I think we're also live on Facebook and Twitch and I think a couple other places. But we are going to be talking Week 6 fantasy football. I'm going to be answering as many questions as I can over the next 60, 90, maybe 120 minutes like I did last week. Whether it's start sit questions for week 6, trade questions, whatever you got, I'm going to answer as many questions as I can in the next 60 to 120 minutes right here live on episode 42, I think, of Inside the 20 by Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. Happy Friday, y'all. Welcome to the basement. During this episode, I will be enjoying it's called an Ancla Dorada. It's a Mexican lager from Ruby Beach Brewing down in Jacksonville. Cool story about that. And this is not a paid advertisement, by the way. It's just been the type of week. I don't know if you guys are paying attention to the injuries in fantasy football. And when you're somebody like me who writes about every single player on every single team every single week, I spend 30 plus hours a week writing about 250 plus players. And when you have a week like this week where injuries were extra annoying, like Michael Pittman suddenly popping up on the report in the middle of the week, James Cook, etc., it's time to pour a Mexican lager into a frosted basement brewed fantasy football beer mug. So this beer, by the way, this is from Ruby Beach. You can't really see it, but it's from Ruby Beach Brewing. Mark Vandeloo is the owner. It's down in Jacksonville, which I've never been to Jacksonville. Several weeks back, I was having mid-August, I was having a particularly frustrating week as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, where my payment processor out of nowhere, after 2+ years of working with them, decided to shut down my account because they decided that making fantasy football spreadsheets was way too close to online gambling. So they shut down my account in mid-August, which is it's fantasy football draft season. It's the most important time of year for my business, my little company. And if you're tuning in and you're not familiar with me, if we've never met before, if I've never interacted with you on LinkedIn or wherever, fantasy football is not just a hobby for me. I quit my full-time corporate career to dive in and do this full time. So this is what I do for a living all day, every day. So when my payment processor shut down my account in the busiest time of year for me, that was potentially devastating for my company, for my business. The way that I explained it to my kids was it was like taking away Santa Claus's reindeer on December 20th. Like, it was just super frustrating. But anyway, Mark Vandeloo over at Ruby Beach Brewing, who's a fellow entrepreneur. He's a fantasy football player. He's a Basement Brewed Fantasy Football subscriber. He took it upon himself to ship me a 6-pack of all different kinds of Ruby Beach Brewing beers. And I have purposely not tried them off of the podcast because I want to try them on the podcast. So the last time we did an American lager, and today we are going to do this Mexican lager, which I tend to have a love or hate relationship with Mexican lager. So I'm in Milwaukee, big brewery city. I can't tell you how many times I've had a Mexican lager where I've either loved it or hated it. So this is going to be really, really interesting. Again, it's the Ancla Dorada. Never had it before. We're going to try it together live here. Now, as I'm having my first sip of this, feel free to start flooding the comment section. Like I said, I'm going to spend the next hour, 90 minutes, 120 minutes. We'll see how many comments we get, answering as many Week 6 fantasy football questions as I possibly can. Like I said, I spent the last 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, usually about 30 hours a week, analyzing and writing about every single player in every single game of every single week. There's literally 250 players worth of knowledge in this dome that I intend to use to outsmart my competition and dominate week 6. So take advantage. Let me know what questions you have. Start dropping them in the comments below. It looks like we have some flooding in, but in the meantime, I got to get a really quick sip of this. Ancla Dorada. Is that what it's called? All right. Mexican lager. And it's noon central on a Friday. So I'm about 3 beers behind where I should be in Milwaukee. Oh, that's good. I just wish I had a lime that I could throw in there. But that's a very, very, very good Mexican lager. And I promise I would be honest. If I hated it, there's a reason I haven't done the sour yet, because that one's probably not going to go too well with me because I'm not a sour guy. But as far as Mexican lagers go, this is a good one. Obviously, I recommend tossing a lime in there, but if you're in the Jacksonville area, highly recommend it. Give Ruby Beach Brewing a look. Again, this is not a paid advertisement. It's just something I wanted to do on the show because it was a really cool gesture for Mark to send me those beers. So Mark, if you're watching, thanks again. All right, let's dive into these comments. We got GQ popping in. Happy Friday, y'all. Greg, happy Friday, my friend. Thank you for being here each and every Friday. JP, good to see you back. Hope the wedding was awesome in Minnesota last week. I know there's not too much that's awesome in Minnesota besides Sam Darnold, but not the Vikings. But I hope the wedding was awesome, man. Good to see you back. Thanks for tuning in here. GQ says, if you can field a full team this week, congrats, you win. Yeah, there's no denying that. I said this last week, but there was one league during a period of time, I think it was week 3, where I had Cooper Kupp, AJ Brown, and Deebo Samuel as my 1, 2, 3 wide receivers, and none of them were active for that week. And I was like, what? I was just trying to find some warm bodies. Rafi popping on to say 414. Welcome to the 414. Rafi, I know you're from Wisconsin, my man. Thank you for tuning in here. All right, let's jump into the first time tuning in. Thanks, Rafi. I really appreciate you being here, good sir. We are going to hop into the first question of the day. It comes from Mr. Jordan Poggle. By the way, before I get into this, again, this one's also not a paid promotion, but if you are somebody who's looking to get in the best shape of your life, if you're looking to get in the best mental fitness, the best mental headspace of your life, I can't recommend working with Jordan enough. I personally have worked with Jordan. I've lowered my blood pressure, my cholesterol. I accidentally lost 11, 12 pounds working with Jordan. And he texted me a couple days ago that he's actually running it. I don't know if I'm supposed to be talking about this, Jordan, so sorry if I'm ruining it, but he's running a promotion right now where if you work with him, you basically purchase 3 months of coaching with him, you get a month free. So Jordan, feel free to drop your LinkedIn or your email or anything you want in the comments. And if anybody wants to get in touch with Jordan, I highly, highly recommend it. The dude works wonders. If you're looking to just get in shape, get fit, mental fitness, physical fitness, all of the above, there's nobody on the planet that's better than Jordan. Again, also not a paid promotion. It's just a friend trying to help a friend. And I can speak to the good that Jordan does in working with his clients. All right, let's talk fantasy football, my friends. James Conner, Alvin Kamara, Najee Harris. I know you have Kamara one column higher. He's referring to the heat map, which I'll pull up in a second here. But I'm having a hard time loving the offensive situation with New Orleans this week. Yeah, man, I definitely feel that. Let me pop up the old heat map here. So if this is your first time seeing, look at that. I'm actually prepared this week. I have everything ready to go. I know which buttons to press, all that. If this is your first time seeing the heat map, this is the resource that started my entire company. Okay. This thing went viral on Reddit a couple years back. I wonder if I can pump this up a little bit. Yeah. This thing went viral on Reddit a couple years back. It contains contextual analysis for every single player in every single game to help you conquer these really difficult decisions that Jordan's referring to. So let's dive in. We're wondering James Conner, Alvin Kamara, or Najee Harris. Jordan, I'm just guessing that you need one of these. Actually, yep. I'm getting better at looking at the comments too. Looks like you just need one of these guys. So James Conner, Alvin Kamara, Najee Harris. First of all, this is a good problem to have. If you're in a situation where you can potentially put Alvin Kamara on your bench, then you're doing okay. Things are going all right. But let's start with James Conner, right? He's going against my beloved Green Bay Packers. This is game number 8 on the heat map, meaning it's literally the 8th game that I got around to writing this week. The game itself, in general, is a game that I want a piece of because it is projected to be a pretty high scoring game. It has an over under 47.5, which is among the highest on the week 14 slate. The Cardinals are 5.5 point underdogs. I don't love that, That's typically if you have the running back on a team that's a pretty heavy underdog, that's a red flag. There's cause for concern there. The reason being, if the Cardinals do fall behind, and again, they're expected to lose by 5.5 points, if they do fall behind and fall behind early, then theoretically they might get pressed into some pass-heavy game script, which would threaten potential rushing volume of Cardinals pass catchers. Now, that being said, we have seen James Conner be productive in the passing game in the past with the Cardinals. He's been there for a few years now. We've seen him have 4, 5, 6 target games. So he is not necessarily somebody that would automatically get scripted out of a game if the Packers started to run away with it. However, and we'll dig into this in a minute, James Conner isn't doing all that much in the passing game this year. Again, that could change, but we've seen the Cardinals get blown out they got whooped up by Washington a couple weeks ago, and if I recall, James Conner didn't do a heck of a lot in that game. So anyway, being 5.5 point underdogs is not a good thing for James Conner. That is a little bit of a red flag there, although it's not a death sentence, if you will. The Cardinals are projected to score about 21 points. They have an implied point total of about 21. That's not terrible. It's not great. It's kind of right in the middle of the pack. And you'll see that there's a 17 underneath running back when you're looking at the Packers. Where did it go? Packers, 17 running back. That means they're smack dab in the middle when it comes to PPR points allowed to running backs. So they're allowing, quote unquote, the 17th most, quote unquote, PPR points per game to enemy running backs. The other way to look at that is the 16th fewest, quote unquote, PPR points to running backs. Now, if we want to look at James Conner specifically, we look at game number 8, Arizona, Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison, Trey McBride. I need to look one column deeper, which is the yellow column, which is where we find James Conner, game number 8, Arizona running back. He's in the yellow column, which is my meh. I don't necessarily feel great about this. This isn't meant to say that it's meant to say that I feel meh about having James Conner in my lineup in week 6, right? It means there's nothing in the data that strongly suggests he's going to have a great game, and there's nothing in the data that strongly suggests he's going to have a poor game. It's just kind of like, nah, if you got him, I guess put him in your lineup, but don't expect an explosion and don't necessarily expect a dud either. Double click on his name, and you're going to see, when I said I spent 30 plus hours a week on it, this is why. Every single player comes with analysis for what to expect. It's organized by the game script, what to expect in that game, which we've already talked about, the over-under, Cardinals implied point total, being 5.5 point underdogs. And when you scroll down, we're going to talk a little bit about James Conner himself. After 5 games, he's averaging over 18 touches per game, but he's only getting, right here, you see 2 targets per game. That's concerning when you realize that the Cardinals are 5.5 point underdogs. If they fall behind Green Bay, there is a possibility that James Conner's rushing volume could be threatened, and he's not doing enough in the passing game to make up for that. So that's a red flag. Again, not a death sentence, but a red flag. Ultimately, James Conner is getting you about 14.1 PPR points per game on 18 touches. Not the most efficient numbers, but definitely usable for fantasy football. He scored 17 to 20 PPR points in 3 of 5 games this year, but he also scored fewer than 13 PPR points in 2 of 5 games with a low of 3.5 back in week 3. And that might have been the game that they got spanked by Washington. If I might be mistaken there. I can't quite recall off the top of my head. But so anyways, what we're seeing from James Conner is some boom or bust. He's had some really good weeks. He's had some really bad weeks. Not really much in between for James Conner. Now, as for the matchup itself, the Packers are a mediocre matchup for running backs. They're allowing the 8th most receiving yards, but other than that, they are, and when I say 8th most receiving yards, I'm talking about specifically to running backs. They're allowing the 8th most receiving yards to running backs. But other than that, they are holding running backs to the 10th fewest touches, 13th fewest catches, 15th fewest yards, 16th fewest touchdowns, and 16th fewest PPR points per game. 4 running backs in 5 games, however, have been able to score 15 or more PPR points against the Green Bay Packers. Saquon Barkley got 33.2 in week 1, but 3 of the 4 running backs that scored 15 or more PPR points against Green Bay needed 23 or more touches to get there. And are we expecting James Conner to get 23 touches? Probably not, as 5.5 point underdogs against the Green Bay Packers. Saquon Barkley scored, and this is where I kind of give you details as to similar workloads as to what we might expect from James Conner. Saquon Barkley got 33 on 26 touches. Jonathan Taylor, got 15 points on 14 touches. Aaron Jones got 18 points on 26 touches, and Kyron Williams got about 18 points on 23 touches. But again, is James Conner going to get that kind of workload? I love James Conner as an option, but I don't necessarily love him as an option in week 6. Okay. Let's look next at Najee Harris, and then we're going to do Alvin Kamara. So Najee Harris is right here in the yellow column, game 10 in general, whereas the Packers-Cardinals is a game I want to target. It's a high-scoring game. Let me get this out of the way here. Packers-Cardinals is a high-scoring game that I want to target. It has a nice over-under of 47.5 points. The Steelers-Raiders is the opposite. This is one of two, well, there's a few games, but this is one of the bottom 2 games in all of week 6 fantasy football that I want to avoid wherever I can. And I shouldn't say wherever I can, but mostly avoid. Meaning there's not a lot of football players in this game that I would want exposure to because of how ugly the game itself will be, right? Typically in fantasy football, you want touchdowns. And in this game with a 36.5 point over under, we're not expecting there to be many touchdowns at all for either team. Look at their implied point totals. Neither team is projected to score even 20 points. Okay. The Steelers are projected to win by 3, and they're not even expected to score 20 points. Okay. So generally speaking, this is a game that I don't want a heck of a lot of exposure to. Now, one of the exceptions to that just might be Najee Harris, largely because the Pittsburgh, he's getting a ton of volume. Jalen Warren's not going to play. Cordero Patterson's not going to play. He's once again he's in line for another 20 plus touches. Whether or not he finally does something with them, that might be a different story, but he is in line for plenty of volume, and volume is what wins in fantasy football, unless you're Najee Harris. So the Steelers are favored by 3 points. That's a good sign for Najee Harris. It's not this overwhelming spread or this overwhelming Steelers are going to whoop the Raiders, but it does suggest at least a neutral game script, if not a positive game script, that will allow the Steelers to do what they want to do, which is run the football as much as possible. Okay. All of that is good for Najee Harris, even if his likelihood of finding the end zone isn't necessarily the greatest being on the Steelers. Okay. But here's what I do like. You look at the Raiders under running back and you'll see the number 5. That means the Raiders are allowing the 5th most PPR points per game to opposing running backs. That is a great sign for Najee Harris. So let's double click on his name and see what we're dealing with. I'll try and do it at the very top so that it's easier to see. All right, bottom line, we're treating him like a low-end RB2, but one who has matchup upside, which we'll talk about in a minute. But he also has, by the way, and this is important, positive touchdown regression upside in week 6. And this isn't a gut thing. This isn't hey, I feel like he might score a touchdown thing. If you're familiar with me, if you're not familiar with me, one thing you need to know is that everything you see on the heat map is 100% data. None of it is, I think this player is going to have a good game because XYZ. Every single thing in the heat map is fact. It's data. It's information that you can use to make the best possible decisions in your league. Part of that is touchdown regression and touchdown analysis. And all touchdown regression is math. So when at the very bottom, you'll see that there is a touchdown regression tab on the heat map. It's nothing pretty. It's nothing I've spent time designing to make look nice, but you'll see Najee Harris is the number 9 player on here. He's the number 2 running back on this list because he has 389 scrimmage yards, no touchdowns. He's about 1.6 touchdowns behind where he quote unquote should be compared to other running backs over the last half decade. So Najee Harris is a big time positive touchdown regression candidate, and everything is working in his favor for that to happen. The Steelers are favored. They'll keep the ball on the ground. There's no competition for touches. Najee Harris is a really good bet to score a touchdown in week 6. So if you're somebody who is interested in, like, I know there's a lot of in states where gambling is legal, there's an opportunity to anytime touchdown. Najee Harris is as good a bet at any if I was the one making that bet. That's totally up to you. This is not betting advice, not gambling advice. That's not my forte, but just something to keep in mind. Now, Steelers Raiders, we already talked about what to expect from that game. Low scoring game, but the Steelers should have an opportunity to control the ball. Now, Najee Harris himself, after 5 games, he's averaging really strong touches. He's getting about 19 touches per game, but somehow he's averaging just 10.2 PPR points per game. And that's because he's not scoring touchdowns. He's not finding the end zone. I added a little note here that reminds of Anchorman. I'm not even mad. I'm impressed. Like, scoring half the points of touches is wild. Like, you just don't see that in fantasy football. He scored 10.3 PPR points in week 4 and a season high 13.6 points in week 3, but he's otherwise scored fewer than 10 PPR points in each of the other 3 games. Okay. It has not been pretty for Najee Harris, but he has handled 16 or more touches in all 5 games this season. He is going to get the football. That is not a question by any means. He's got 94 touches, 389 scrimmage yards, but 0 touchdowns. We already talked about him being a touchdown regression candidate. And then when we look at the matchup, right, the Raiders are getting smashed by running backs. They're allowing the 13th most touches, 5th most catches, 11th most rushing yards, 10th most receiving yards, 12th most touchdowns, and overall the 5th most PPR points per game to opposing running backs. They're getting beat up by opposing running backs. 3 different running backs in 5 games have landed between 17 and 19 touches against the Raiders. Among them, Derrick Henry scored nearly 17 points on 19 touches. Jerome Ford scored nearly 16 points on 17 touches. And Javonte Williams scored 16 points on 18 touches, all of which are very similar workloads to what we'll see from Najee Harris. Feeling very, very optimistic about Najee here. Last but not least, Chuba Hubbard scored 27.9, but in week 3, but he did have 26 touches, which is a number that Najee Harris could reach, but it's not necessarily a likely number. All in all, we're feeling cautiously optimistic about Najee Harris's chances. If I'm the one making the decision between James Conner versus Najee Harris, I got to be honest, this is it's super uncomfortable, but if this was me and I was making that decision, I'd be going with Najee Harris there. However, we have one last option, Mr. Alvin Kamara. Now, Jordan mentioned that he's nervous about the status of the Saints with Spencer Rattler, not Derek Carr at quarterback. Totally valid. We'll talk about all of that in 1 second. The game itself, not necessarily exciting. I don't love that the Saints are in a low-scoring game. I don't love that they're 3.5-point underdogs, although if there's one running back in football that can capitalize on the passing game, it's Alvin Kamara. That is not a secret. That's the way it's been for years. Okay. I don't love that the Saints have an implied total below 20 points. They're not expected to put a lot of touchdowns on the board, and touchdowns are where fantasy points come from. What I do like is that the Buccaneers are an above average matchup for running backs. They're allowing the 12th most PPR points per game to the position. Now, if we look at Alvin Kamara specifically, I have him in column B with a yellow dot, meaning he's in column B, but he's closer to column C than he is in column A. And that's largely because of the status and the state of the New England Patriots offense without Derek Carr. I did mention in the bottom line, Alvin Kamara is a volume-based RB1/2, but it's fair to wonder how effective he can be if this offense takes a big step back without Derek Carr. Kamara himself, still elite. He's averaging 22.8 touches per game, including 5.6 targets and 4.6 catches for 120 scrimmage yards, 1.2 touchdowns per game. He's got 6 touchdowns in 5 games, and he's getting you near 24 PPR points per game. He's at 22.8 touches per game. He's very, very, very clearly the offensive focal point, the offensive engine for the New Orleans Saints, and that is not going to change with the input or the insertion of Spencer Rattler at quarterback. If anything, they are going to lean as much as they can on their best player, who is Alvin Kamara. Now, I did mention that in the heat map. I said he'll undoubtedly be the focal point of the Saints offense, but unfortunately, everybody knows that, including the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, meaning they are going to, it seems likely that they would sell out to stop Kamara. Still, Kamara has 15 or more points in 4 of 5 games this season, including 22 or more points in 3 of 5 games. Now, as for the matchup itself, the Buccaneers are mediocre against running backs so far. They're holding them to the 9th fewest touches, 9th fewest rushing yards, and 11th fewest touchdowns, but they're also allowing the 3rd most running back catches, 3rd most running back receiving yards, and 12th most overall PPR points per game. 4 different running backs in 5 games have handled between 15 and 20 touches against the Bucs, which is similar to what Alvin Kamara would see. 3 of them landed between 17 and 18 PPR points. Brian Robinson, David Montgomery, and Jahmyr Gibbs all understood the assignment, while Bijan Robinson scored just 10.7 points on 15 touches last week. Now, in his career against the Buccaneers, Alvin Kamara has done really well. He's averaging 18.9 PPR points per game, 17.4 touches per game, over 13 contests against the Bucs. He scored 13 or more PPR points in 10 of 13 games against the Bucs, including 6 games over 21, but he scored fewer than 7 PPR points in the other 3 games. Still, that's a very small amount when you look at his overall sample size against the Saints. Last but not least, Kamara was hit and miss against the Bucs last year. He scored 21.4 points on 24 touches against the Bucs in week 4, but then just 6.9, very nice, points on 12 touches in week 17. So the question is, if I am choosing one between James Conner, Alvin Kamara, and Najee Harris, it's still Alvin Kamara. It's not comfortable. There's no way to feel good about it. But if we're being honest, I wouldn't feel great about James Conner. I wouldn't feel awesome about Najee Harris, although I do really like him this week. But I think there's no way that you can bench Alvin Kamara considering what he's doing, what he's done, and the fact that the Saints are going to do everything they can to get him the ball and get him the ball in space as well. So Jordan, hope that helps. I'm going with Alvin Kamara here. If you're not comfortable with that, I would give a slight edge to Najee Harris over James Conner, which is wild because Najee Harris has done nothing. But fantasy football is a game of looking forward, and I like Najee Harris's week 6 outlook. All right. That was a lot, and I'm going to try and speed up the rest of them. But if you're liking what you're seeing, if you're liking this heat map, by the way, again, this is the tool that started my entire business, and it's available over on Patreon. So on Patreon, you have the opportunity to get it as you could get the week 6 heat map for just the cost of 1 beer. That's all I'm asking. You buy me 1 beer, $4.99, and you're going to be able to get the week 6 heat map, which is going to offer contextual analysis for every single player and every single game. If you like it enough that you're like, oh yeah, I want this for the rest of the season, you can also just scoop up the entire remainder of the 2024 season. I lower the cost of this package $3 after every Sunday so that you're not paying full price for like people did in week 1. You're paying for week 6 and on. The price of the remainder of the package is $44.99. Again, you can just get it on Patreon. I just right now dropped a link for you in the comments, but if you can't find it, it's patreon.com/basementbrewedff/shop if you want to go the extra mile there. All right. After all that, I definitely need a drink of this awesome Mexican lager. So in the meantime, here's a quick word from my sponsors. Are you a software wizard? A code ninja? A forge master? Or maybe even just a mad scientist? Then come build your career ladder with Infinity Labs, an award-winning technology company, best place to work, and business of the year with best-in-class benefits and compensation. Visit i-labs.tech. That's i-labs.tech today, where you can learn more about Infinity Labs, our expanding national presence, and why the status quo has no hold on us. All right, dude, I'm telling you, this Mexican lager is hitting on a Friday afternoon. Jordan pops in and says, love you too, brother. Appreciate everything you've done for me, and hopefully you found that answer helpful. My guy Bryant Bailey wants to know Irving, Bigsby, or Tracy. Pick 2. Okay, so we're gonna leave 1 on the bench here. Full disclosure, usually by the time Thursday night football hits, I am exhausted. Okay, like putting this heat map together, you guys, I can't emphasize enough how much work goes into this, like sacrifice of sleep, sacrifice of meals. Tuesday to Thursday it's a lot. The point is, usually once the time Thursday night football hits, I kind of unplug from the NFL until this show. Meaning, I have not checked in on Rashad White, who I know is dealing with an injury. I have not checked in on Devin Singletary, who I know is dealing with an injury. Now, the last I saw, Singletary should be good to go. And if that's the case, Tyrone Tracy is not going to be an option in this equation. He wasn't involved before Devin Singletary. He balled out last week, but and it's fair to wonder if he's going to get more involved moving forward. But for now, if Devin Singletary is active, then Tyrone Tracy is a wait and see bench stash instead of a flex option. I would say if anybody can help me out in the comments on what we know about Devin Singletary, but I think Devin Singletary is going to be good to go, which would eliminate Tyrone Tracy and make the rest of this decision really easy. Tank Bigsby I'm not going to say he's taking over, but the dude's a baller. I was 1 year too early. I banged the table for him last year. Travis Etienne feasted last year, but Tank Bigsby's a baller. Travis Etienne has been declining since the second half of last year, not necessarily in terms of play, but in terms of fantasy football usage. Tank Bigsby's, after what he did last week, he's only going to get more and more involved in that offense. He's very much a legitimate threat to Travis Etienne. He's not getting enough volume to be he's not getting enough volume to be like an RB2 with RB1 upside, but he's definitely going to be getting enough to be an RB3/flex with big time upside should anything happen to Travis Etienne. They're playing that game in London. I don't love that the Jaguars are underdogs, but it's just 1.5 points. That's a neutral game script. The game could go either way. It could go in favor of the Jags. And the Bears offer a somewhat positive matchup for running backs, allowing the 10th most PPR points per game. I got Tank Bigsby here. After 3 clunkers and 1 eruption, Tank Bigsby is averaging 8.8 touches per game and 10.8 PPR points per game. Now, he scored fewer than 10 PPR points in each of the first 3, but he erupted for nearly 26 points on 14 touches last week. Now, here's the really, really fascinating piece, and maybe it's just a one-off, but Tank Bigsby actually played more offensive snaps than Travis Etienne did last week. Just one. He played 40% and Etienne played 38%. But it's not the sort of thing where it looks like a 60-40, a 70-30 split. This thing is getting pretty close to 50-50. So he's getting more and more involved. Now, keep in mind, Travis Etienne was allegedly dealing with some sort of shoulder injury, and that could have impacted playing time. But even if that's the case, Bigsby smashed with the opportunity that he was given. He's going to get more involved. I have been saying for over a year now, it's been 2 years running, I've been talking about Doug Peterson's history as a head coach, as an offensive play caller, and he has long been the type of coach that prefers having multiple running backs involved, not just having one, not having a workhorse. Travis Etienne getting the work that he did last year was an outlier in the overall resume of Doug Peterson's career. So if we look at data suggests Doug Peterson wants 2 backs, if not more, involved. So Tank Bigsby is just going to keep going and going and going. Okay. The matchup looks pretty good. The Bears are an above average matchup. They're allowing the 9th most catches, which doesn't really benefit Bigsby. In fact, his first catch was just last week of the season. So don't look at catches. But they are allowing the 13th most rushing yards, 6th most touchdowns, and 10th most PPR points, despite holding them to the 13th fewest touches and 7th fewest receiving yards, which again, receiving yards don't really matter for Tank Bigsby. 4 running backs in 5 games have scored 18 or more PPR points against the Bears. Of course, all of them needed 17 or more touches to do so, which is not likely for Tank Bigsby. So I am approaching Bigsby this week as somewhat of a risky RB3/flex play because he hasn't gotten the consistent volume in the past, but enough upside to be worthy of lineup consideration. I would be going with Tank Bigsby and Bucky Irving here over Tyrone Tracy, unless, well, hold on. I forgot to talk about Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. Buccaneers, love that they're 3.5 point favorites for Bucky Irving. That's a good thing. They'll be able to keep the ball on the ground. It's fair to wonder how competitive the Saints will be. They would need, Spencer Rattler would need to surprise for them to keep up. Matchup's not great. The Saints are holding running backs to the 11th fewest PPR points per game. Now, this is game number 4. Bucky Irving, we have him in the yellow column, but we do have him in orange, and that's largely because of the matchup, right? The Saints have been tough on running backs. They are allowing the 12th most receiving yards, but they're otherwise holding running backs to the 7th fewest touches, 13th fewest catches, 14th fewest rushing yards, 12th fewest scrimmage yards, 11th fewest touchdowns, and 11th fewest PPR points per game. That, by the way, is nothing new. The Saints have been tough on running backs for a half decade. At this point, they've held enemy running backs to the 12th fewest or worse PPR points per game in each of the last 4 seasons, including the 7th fewest PPR points per game last year. So them being tough on running back, it's not new. That's been going on for years now. 3 running backs in the last 4 games have handled 10 or 11 touches against the Saints, which is on par with what Bucky Irving usually gets, none of which were able to reach 12 PPR points. Rico Dowdle scored 9.9 on 11 touches in week 2. Bijan Robinson scored just 11 points on 11 touches in week 4. And Tyler Algier scored 10 on 10 touches in week 4. Saquon scored 31.6 against the Saints, but he needed 21 touches to get there, which is not likely something that Bucky Irving will see. Same thing with Kareem Hunt, nearly 19 PPR points last week, but he needed 28 touches to get there. Neither Buccaneers running back is projected to come close to those numbers. So I'd be looking more in this range. Now, the last thing I'll say here, Bryant, if it turns out that Rachaad White is... Okay, sorry, hold on. If it turns out that Devin Singletary does not play, I would be putting Tyrone Tracy in my lineup. If it turns out that Rachaad White doesn't play, Bucky Irving there's a ton of upside there. So, assuming Devin Singletary plays football, I'm going with Bucky Irving and Tank Bigsby. If for some reason Devin Singletary does not play, and like I said, I'm pretty sure he is planning on playing, then for me, again, if he doesn't play, then Tracy would be in. And then I would be going with Tank Bigsby over Bucky Irving unless Rachaad White doesn't play. If Rachaad White doesn't play, Bucky Irving is locked in. If Devin Singletary doesn't play, Tyrone Tracy is locked in. Then the other guy would be Tank Bigsby. But I would want to get Bigsby into my lineup. So hopefully that helps. Rafi wants to know, do you think Jordan Love is throwing an interception this weekend? Man, why would you even put that in my head? Go Pack, go. I want to think about touchdowns. I don't want to think about that. I mean, looks like it's going to be a shootout, right? 47.5 points. Pack are favored. Josh Jacobs, by the way, is a touchdown regression candidate. He should keep scoring. I joked in our Discord server. If you haven't seen our Discord server, there's 200 fantasy football players up in here helping each other dominate, helping each other conquer. I joked the other day, where was it? Joked in here that Josh Jacobs is scoring 2 touchdowns on Sunday. And there's a lot of data that suggests a big day for Josh Jacobs is coming. I'm really excited about him. I mean, the Cardinals are allowing the 9th most. Here, let me pop this up. This'll help me decide. The Cardinals are allowing the 9th most PPR points, or PPR doesn't matter. Fantasy points, 2 quarterbacks this season. This is what I'm pulling up in spreadsheets. So this isn't going to be pretty for you guys, but still, maybe you'll enjoy seeing how the sausage is made a little bit. Popping up if it loads here. Cardinals they're getting interceptions. They got 4 in just 5 games. They're averaging about 0.8 per game, which is the 10th most in all of football. So, they have a good chance of throwing an interception. As a Packer fan, I'm just going to say no. I'm going to say no, he doesn't throw an interception. But as a Packer fan, I'm going to say no. As an analyst, I'm going to say, you know what? There's actually a pretty good chance he does because he's been throwing interceptions and the Cardinals are getting interceptions. Aha! This is what I want to know. Is Josh Jacobs getting a touchdown this weekend? Like I said, in the Discord server, I literally joked that he's getting 2 touchdowns this weekend. Here's why. I won't go into the whole thing, but let me pop this up. I have him in the B column with a blue dot, meaning like he's trending closer to column A. And column A is like he checks all of the boxes. Everything you could possibly look for an explosion week, he checks all of those boxes. And Josh Jacobs is trending in that direction. So, looking at the matchup, the Cardinals are offering the 5th most touches, 2nd most rushing yards, 6th most touchdowns, and 8th most PPR points per game to opposing running backs. And that could be higher, but they're holding running backs to the 4th fewest catches, 9th fewest receiving yards. But that hasn't been a big part of Josh Jacobs' game anyway. 6 running backs in 5 games have handled 15 or more touches against the Cardinals. And I think it's fair for us to pencil in 15 or more touches for Josh Jacobs. Among those running backs, 4 of them were able to score 15 or more PPR points against Arizona, 2 of which were able to reach 20. Here's an entire list. If you really want the details, here's an entire list of everybody with a similar workload to Josh Jacobs and what they've done against the Cardinals. But TLDR, it's good. They've all done well against the Arizona Cardinals. Now you got Josh Jacobs himself, right? After 5 games in beautiful green and gold, Jacobs is averaging over 19 touches, 19 touches and 95 scrimmage yards, but he has just 1 touchdown. He has 98 total touches, 475 scrimmage yards, but just 1 touchdown on the season. He is the number 1 running back candidate on the positive touchdown regression cheat sheet that I put into the bottom of the heat map. He's the number 1 non-tight end, which I'm revising, non-tight end candidate, meaning he's the number 1 candidate to score a touchdown here. So you got Josh Jacobs, who's a touchdown regression candidate going against in a great matchup against the Cardinals. And the script is delicious. There's some shootout potential at a 47.5 point over under. The Packers have a really strong implied point total of 26.5 points. That's the 3rd highest on the 28 team slate. The Packers are 5.5 point home favorites, suggesting a positive game script. They should be in position to kill the clock in the second half. So Josh Jacobs is going to have plenty of volume, plenty of efficiency opportunity, considering the defense he's going against. And he is primed for another touchdown or 2. Okay. So if I'm betting on any running back to score a touchdown this week, it's Josh Jacobs. Boom. Boom. All right. Real quick. I totally forgot. I am going to start tracking these. So let me pull this over here real quick. Alvin Kamara, James Conner, and who's the other one? Oh, Najee. And my answer was Kamara. What was it? Jordan Love touchdown? I said no, or Jordan Love interception. See, I need to hire somebody to do this. I said yes. And I also said Josh Jacobs tutty. Okay. Maybe I won't be doing this. That's way too hard to track. Let's get back to it. All right. Scorpio wants to know, I traded CeeDee Lamb for Jahmyr Gibbs and DJ Moore. Did I get scammed? No, man, I don't think there's any way to think you got scammed. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs is balling. He's scored more than, I think, 16, at least 15. He scored 15 or more PPR points in every single game. So him alone and CD, that's a pretty even trade. I mean, both guys were drafted in the first round when you really think about it. And then you got DJ Moore, tossed in there for free. So I don't think you got scammed. I do think CeeDee Lamb is he could go absolutely nuts against the Lions this week, but I don't think you got scammed. I think that trade is fine. Donnie Kane wants to know, chat, do I start Chase Brown, T. Higgins, or D. Johnson? All right, let's dive in. We got 2 Bengals players. So Bengals, who do the Bengals play this week? Oh, the Giants. Yeah. Sunday Night Football. So this game actually has some pretty sneaky shootout potential. So the over-under is 48.5, which is above average. That's got to be the 4th, maybe 5th highest on the 14-game slate. Both teams are projected to score at least 22 points. And the Giants have a slightly above average implied point total, meaning they're expected to score slightly more than half the teams in week 6. 28 teams, they're right around 14. 14th highest implied point total. So you have 2 teams with it above average implied point totals. That often suggests a possible shootout. You got the Bengals, who are expected to score about 26 points. That's going to be somewhere around 5th most on the slate. Generally speaking, this game is a game I would want to get exposure to. Although I did just see that Malik Neighbors is out. That's so frustrating. I don't have a clue how he's still dealing with a concussion, although I'm not even close to a medical doctor, so I wouldn't have a clue anyway. But if that's the case and Malik Neighbors is out, this over-under probably dropped. The Giants' implied total probably dropped. Kind of kills the gusto there. But on the flip side, the Bengals are probably favored a little bit higher. Maybe they're 4.5-point favorites now, if not 5, which is great news for Chase Brown. Generally speaking, I want to get the Bengals in my lineup. I feel good about the Bengals this week. They have a high implied total. They're favored. I would want exposure to Cincinnati in my week 6 fantasy football lineups. Now, there's nothing on the surface that's particularly exciting about Chase Brown or T. Higgins matchup, but let's dive in a little bit. Game 13, we'll start with T. Higgins. Bottom line, strong wide receiver 2, possible sneaky shootout, although that might change with the Malik Neighbors news. After 3 games, he's averaging 10 targets. That's the most exciting thing for T. Higgins, is that he's getting 10 targets per game. The opportunities there, the points will follow, and they already started to trickle in week 5. He's averaging 10 targets, 6 catches, 61-ish yards, and 16.1 PPR points per game, which, by the way, is about on par with his career averages of games with Joe Burrow plus Jamar Chase. He averaged about 15 PPR points per game with those two guys coming into the season. He's producing right at that pace right now. So it's not an outlier. He's right where he's supposed to be. Now, he scored 6.9, very nice, points in his first game back, which was week 3. But again, that was his first game back. You always expect a slower output, slower day. He scored 12 points in week 4, and then he erupted for over 29 points in week 5. He has 24 targets in the last 2 games. He had 14 last week and 10 the week before that. The Giants are allowing the 14th most catches and the 8th most touchdowns to wide receivers, but they're also holding them to the 10th fewest yards and 15th fewest PPR points per game. It's a very mediocre matchup. There's nothing that's exciting and there's nothing that's terrifying about that matchup. Justin Jefferson, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, all 3 of those guys got the better of the G-men this season, but it is worth noting that Terry McLaurin, Jerry Jeudy, that lowercase j is going to drive me nuts. Jerry Jeudy, DK Metcalf. Oh, I did it again. How did I do that? Okay, my shift button doesn't work. That's wild. All right. Jerry Jeudy, DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Tyler Lockett didn't get much going against them. So they're average at the team level, but they seem like they're a little bit tough at the individual level. They did a good job against Terry McLaurin, Jerry Jeudy, DK Metcalf, JSN, and Tyler Lockett, while Justin Jefferson, Amari Cooper, and CeeDee Lamb did the dang thing. So 5 busts compared to 3 booms, if you will. But all in all, we're still talking about T. Higgins, talking about the Bengals offense. There's just a lot to like there. Then you got Chase Brown. And again, I mentioned earlier in the show, let's go down here. I mentioned earlier in the show that I have kind of unplugged from the NFL between Thursday Night Football last night and this very moment. So I have not updated myself on Zach Moss news. Last I saw from Dr. Deepak Chona, I believe it was on Twitter, Zach Moss was not trending in the right direction. He was more likely to miss the game than play in the game. And in that case, Chase Brown would be a really strong RB2 play in week 6. There should be plenty of volume there. Bottom line, if Zach Moss misses week 6, Chase Brown is a strong volume-based RB2 in a tough match, but it is a tough matchup. The Giants have allowed the 6th most RB catches and the 4th most RB receiving yards, but they're otherwise holding running backs to the 5th fewest touches, 9th fewest rushing yards, 5th fewest touchdowns, and 14th fewest PPR points per game. Aaron Jones scored nearly 19 points on 16 touches in week 1, but beyond that, no other running back this season has been able to reach 15 PPR points against the New York Giants. And that Aaron Jones' big day was back in week 1. It's been 4 straight weeks of no other running back hitting 15 PPR points against the G-men. Of course, to be fair, if Tanner's listening, one other running back, who was Brian Robinson, handled more than 13 touches against the Giants, scoring 14.6 PPR points on 18 touches. But Ty Chandler, Austin Eckler, Jerome Ford, Rico Dowdle, and Kenneth Walker, all of those guys landed between 11 and 13 touches against the G-men, most of which landed between 10 and 15 PPR points. So not massive days, but not necessarily terrible either. Now, Zach Moss might miss week 6. That would free up 14.4 touches, 3.8 targets that need to find new homes in the Bengals backfield. Quite literally, there's been no other running back on the Cincinnati Bengals roster that has even smelled the football this year. It's just been Zach Moss. It's just been Chase Brown touching the ball. And that would potentially thrust Chase Brown into a potential bell cow type of role if Zach Moss does miss this game. And that's noteworthy because, like I mentioned earlier, the game itself is an appetizing game. It's potentially going to be a shootout. The Bengals have a strong implied total. They're expected to score a good amount of touchdowns, and where there's touchdowns, there's fantasy points. And the Bengals, at least as of the writing, were 3.5-point favorites, which suggests a potentially positive game script that should allow them to kill the clock in the second half. And that number could continue to grow if, assuming Malik Neighbors won't play in week 6. All in all, we feel really, really good about Chase Brown. If Zach Moss does not play, Chase Brown is a strong RB2 option. And I'd be excited to have him in my lineup. If Zach Moss does play, then Chase Brown is down to RB3 flex. He's still usable, but not nearly as exciting. And in that case, I would definitely prefer T. Higgins over Chase Brown if Zach Moss plays. If Zach Moss doesn't play, I'm totally fine with going Chase Brown over T. Higgins. Again, that's a great problem to have. If you have an opportunity to put T. Higgins on the bench, you're doing something right. Last but not least, we got Deontay Johnson, and that's another great option because he's balling out. He's getting plenty of looks with Andy Dalton, at least in 2 of 3 games. When you look at the game itself, we got Panthers-Falcons. There's a lot that I don't love for the Panthers. I don't love that they are 6.5-point underdogs, although let me take that back. Being 6.5-point underdogs is a good thing, kind of, for Deontay Johnson, because it suggests a negative game script that will eventually force the Panthers to abandon the run, put the ball in the air, and the main beneficiary of raised passing volume is Deontay Johnson, right? Look at what their opponent, the Falcons, did last week. Kirk Cousins threw the ball more than 50 times, and Darnell Mooney got plenty of targets. Drake London got plenty of targets. Kyle Pitts got plenty of targets. Point is, if the Falcons are 6.5, or if the Panthers are 6.5-point underdogs, there's a good chance they fall behind. They put the ball in the air. Deontay Johnson's going to be the number 1 beneficiary of that. Now, they're not expected to score a lot of points, just 20 points, not a lot of touchdowns, not necessarily a lot of fantasy points from touchdowns. But the matchup is nice. It's above average. The Falcons are allowing the 11th most PPR points per game to opposing wide receivers. If we dig into Deontay Johnson specifically, he has 2 bangers and 1 clunker with Andy Dalton. He's averaging 11 targets, 6 catches, 78 yards, and has 2 touchdowns in 3 games with Andy Dalton. He's getting you about 18 PPR points per game with Andy Dalton. He scored 26.2. Got to change that. 26.2 points on 14 targets in week 3, 21 points on 13 targets in week 4. But in week 5, he crashed back to earth with 5.9 points on 6 targets in week 5. Now, the Falcons are holding wide receivers to the 11th fewest yards, but beyond that, they're allowing the 8th most catches, 8th most touchdowns, and 11th most PPR points per game to opposing wide receivers. 5 different wide receivers in 5 games have scored 16 or more PPR points against the Falcons, including 3 that scored 20 or more. Devontae Smith, Rashee Rice, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Mike Evans, all of those guys scored 16 or more points against the Falcons this year, while George Pickens and Chris Godwin are the only 2 fantasy relevant names that came up short of 14 PPR points against the Falcons. So I feel really, really good about Deontay Johnson. I feel good about T. Higgins. I feel good about Chase Brown. This is a great problem to have. This is one of those scenarios where I would highly, highly recommend dropping this very question into the Start Sit channel of my fantasy football Discord server. Again, there's 200 fantasy football players in here, exactly 200, including myself, that are helping out with decisions just like this. You'll see in the Start Sit channel that there's a lot of people already asking questions, helping each other out. I highly recommend it. Being a part of this community, by the way, it's just $4.99 per month. You can join it using the link that I'm about to drop in the comments. It's patreon.com/basementbroodff/membership. You'll find options there to join the community and get the heat map that we're looking at here. But decision time. Do I start Chase Brown, T. Higgins, or Deontay Johnson? I would say there's a little bit of safety versus upside here. Number one, if you're going for safety and quote unquote guaranteed points, although I hate that term because there's no such thing in this game. But if you're going for safety, Chase Brown is going to be the safest bet for fantasy football points if Zach Moss is out. If Zach Moss is out, we can basically guarantee 15 plus touches from Chase Brown. They have a high implied total. There's a good chance he scores a touchdown. Ultimately, if Zach Moss is out, Chase Brown's going to be a great play. He's going to be the preferred play. If you need to swing for the fences and go maximum upside, that's going to be T. Higgins, because if the Giants are able to keep the game competitive, and the Bengals are forced to throw the ball throughout the game, T. Higgins has the talent, the opportunity, and the quarterback to make a big splash, score more than one touchdown, right? Deontay Johnson is more likely to butter his bread on targets, catches, and yards than he is scoring a touchdown. Although if the Panthers score, he's a good bet. But anyways, if Zach Moss plays, if Zach Moss does not play, the answer is Chase Brown for me. If Zach Moss does play, then it's not Chase Brown. It's between T. Higgins and Deontay Johnson. And if I were making that decision, I'd be going with T. Higgins. They're both getting similar amounts of volume, but the game script is higher for the Bengals. The implied point total is higher for the Bengals. I just feel more, there's more of an opportunity for T. Higgins to score a touchdown or two than there is for Deontay Johnson. So, hopefully that helps, Donnie. Man, this is always like the most exhausting part of my Friday. And I'm not picking my nose. I mean, even if I was, don't judge me, but man, the like tip of my nose is so itchy. I don't know if it's because I just shaved and my like hair is like, I don't know, maybe I'm getting sick. I don't know what's going on. Anyway. All right. Next one. Pareko wants to know, offer Daniel Jones and Dontavian Wicks for Darnold in a super flex. I have JJ. I don't know who JJ. Oh, Justin Jefferson, I'm guessing. Yeah, I'm totally down with that trade. I mean, Darnold's balling. I mean, Daniel Jones is actually doing really well this year. He's been really boomer bust. I was just writing about this yesterday. He's been very boomer bust as far as quarterbacks go. You don't see that too often. Usually it's at least somewhat consistent. Daniel Jones scored fewer than 10 points in 2 games, but also 18 or more points in 3 games. So he's like boomer bust as a fantasy football option goes. Sam Darnold's just been steady, consistent. He's been a baller. He didn't do well in week 5, but other than that, he's balling. There's also a less than 1% chance that Sam Darnold ever gets benched in Minnesota this year. Like, obviously, when JJ McCarthy's back, that's a different story. But this year, Darnold should be the guy all year. Daniel Jones is playing well. I don't think he's particularly close to getting benched, but it's at least possible, or at least it was coming into the year, that at some point this year, if he starts playing poorly, Daniel Jones won't do too well. Darnold, by the way, is somebody that I've always been high on. Like, I wasn't happy that JJ McCarthy got hurt. You don't root for guys to get injured. But I did feel positively for Sam Darnold, a little bit excited for him to finally get what I felt like was a fair chance with a good team, right? He had to spend the first couple of years with the Jets. The Panthers never really gave him a chance. He finally is getting an opportunity to shine, and he's shining. He's balling right now. Now, that said, I wouldn't want to lose Dontavian Wicks right now. I think he has a good chance of balling out this week in particular, but I mean, Christian Watson will be back. And when Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Jaden Reed are all on the field, Dontavian Wicks just doesn't get on the football field all that frequently. So I'm fine with this trade. I think it might be just a little bit too much, might be a little bit too rich, but I also can't think of any worthwhile adjustments that would balance it out a little bit. So I'm fine with the trade. Just keep in mind the rest of your roster. I don't know what the rest of your wide receivers look like. Like, is Dontavian Wicks the type of guy who's going to be in your lineup every single week? If so, then I wouldn't like that trade for you. But if Dontavian Wicks is more of a bench decoration, then yeah, I'm totally down with that trade. Brian Green wants to know, given the current situation in Dallas with Cooks, would you pick up Jay Tolbert? The answer is yes already. or Keon Coleman of Buffalo going forward. I don't know which one to pick up. Both available this week in my league. Great video. Hey, thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. Short term, it's Tolbert. Like I talked about Jalen Tolbert in my waiver wire episode on Tuesday. The dude, he's balling. He was balling before Brandon Cooks got hurt. Then Brandon Cooks went on IR. Jalen Tolbert immediately racked up 10 targets, caught the game-winning touchdown last week. Brandon Cooks has done pretty much nothing in his time in Dallas, which is a bummer to say. I love Brandon Cooks, but he hasn't done much. Jalen Tolbert is doing plenty, and his first game as Dallas's wide receiver 2 went about as good as it could go. There is a legitimate opportunity that Tolbert passes Cooks on the depth chart. Now, I'm saying that out of years and years of football studying and analysis. I'm not saying that as like, I don't have any sort of inside information. I don't know if like nobody told me that. It's just when you think about what Brandon Cooks has done or not done, and you think about what Jalen Tolbert's doing, there is a legitimate chance that Jalen Tolbert is the wide receiver 2. At worst, Jalen Tolbert is the wide receiver 2 in the next 3 games. And he's just more appetizing than Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman, I was excited about, kind of. I had a sliver of optimism last week because Khalil Shakir was out, and he might still be out. But Coleman caught 1 ball. He scored a touchdown, a 47-yard touchdown on it, but it was 1 catch. That's not sustainable. He's not like, if you're catching 1 pass a game, it's not going to be a touchdown every time. And he just hasn't really, like, he's on the field more than any other wide receiver in Buffalo's offense, which should be exciting when you got Josh Allen as your quarterback, but he's not doing anything. Now, you do see in fantasy football, rookies and rookie wide receivers catch fire at some point later in their first season. Well, Rashee Rice did it last year. He didn't really do much in the first half of the season, and then all of a sudden he was a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. So long-term, I would want Keon Coleman. But if you want to get sneaky and play the waiver wire game, I'd be looking at Tolbert for the next 3 weeks. And then, especially because, by the way, the Cowboys have a bunch of nice matchups and shootouts coming up. So Jalen Tolbert's going to be a legitimate like wide receiver 3, if not more, for the next couple weeks. But then look at picking up Keon Coleman maybe later in the season, although you'll want to do it before the eruption. I'm sure at some point Keon Coleman's going to have a big day. But Jalen Tolbert it's hard to leave him on the waiver wire right now in particular. Ray or Jalen Tolbert starts it this week. It's Tolbert, man. I mean, I'm glad that those 2 questions went back to back. I'm really excited about Jalen Tolbert. I'll pop it in here real quick. That's what he said. Jalen Tolbert. Well, okay. First of all. Quick Mexican lager to hydrate here. If you had to make a fantasy football roster out of 1 game this week, this is the one. Detroit Lions, Dallas Cowboys. Honorable mention goes to Commanders versus Ravens. But if you had to pick just one, Lions Cowboys is game of the week for fantasy football purposes. It has a mouth-watering 52.5 point over under. That already screams fantasy football points galore. And then you look at both teams' implied point totals, right? Sometimes you see a high over under and it's one team that's supposed to blow out the other team. That's not what's happening here. It's just a 3-point game. It's just a 3-point spread. Both the Cowboys and the Lions are projected to score 24 or more points. Okay. Usually when you see like both of those teams have those have to be top 6, 7, 8 implied point totals. And when you see that, it usually signals a shootout where we saw it last week with the Bengals and the Ravens. Both teams scored 30 plus. I think the Ravens scored 40 plus to finally pull off the victory. Point is, if you could pick one game this week to build a lineup off of, it's this one. And then you look at Dallas' side of the ball. Number one, they're underdogs this week. Again, not a big spread. We shouldn't look too much into the spread this week. It's not big enough to say, oh man, Cowboys are going to have to throw the ball 60 times. It's not like that. But they're also not 14-point favorites where they're only going to throw the ball 25 times. They also are playing a Lions defense that is allowing the second most PPR points per game to opposing wide receivers. And by the way, that trend of getting beat up by wide receivers is not new. The Lions have been bad against wide receivers for a long time. They have allowed the 15th most PPR points per game or more, or a lot more PPR points per game to opposing wide receivers in each of the last 4 seasons, including the third most PPR points per game last year. Okay, so this bottom 3 defense against wide receivers. This has been going on for 1+ years now. This is not new. This isn't something that's just going to fade away. They are allowing the 2nd most PPR points, but also the most catches, the most yards. And by the way, they are somehow holding wide receivers to just the 12th fewest touchdowns. 12th fewest touchdowns, despite allowing the most catches and most yards to wide receivers. Again, data, facts, stats, analysis. This screams touchdown regression in a bad way for the Detroit Lions, who are already allowing the 2nd most PPR points per game to wide receivers. And now they're not allowing a lot of touchdowns despite allowing a ton of catches and a ton of yards. Touchdowns are coming in a negative way for the Lions as it pertains to wide receivers are about to start scoring touchdowns in bunches. They've allowed 78 catches and 873 yards, but just 3 touchdowns. Think about one wide receiver in the NFL. If he had 78 catches or 873 yards, you would expect him to have 5-6-ish touchdowns. Well, not 6, but 5-ish touchdowns. Point is, touchdowns are coming. Game's going to be a shootout. Cowboys are going to be throwing the ball. The matchup is great. Absolutely love Jalen Tolbert this week. I'm totally fine with Ray McCloud, but the Falcons are 6.5-point favorites. The Panthers are gosh awful against running backs. Like, they should be able to just Atlanta should be able to feed their running backs like crazy. No real need to throw the ball all that much. There's just way too much upside to ignore for Jalen Tolbert, to the point where I'm not really even considering Ray McCloud a legitimate threat to Jalen Tolbert. My guy Tanner, who is my editor, my producer of the show, the guy who got this whole thing set up and taught me how to use this thing. My guy says, make sure to check out the Tuesday morning episode for the weekly waiver wire video. That's great point. I talk specifically about Jalen Tolbert and a bunch of other guys right in there. All right. More Moss beer, please. 1 second. All right. Axmax 07. Oh, dang. See, I already forgot to start keeping track of these. Whatever. That probably just won't ever happen. Axmax 07 wants to know, start 3, full PPR. Joe Mixon. Again, this is one where I have not yet updated myself. Let me just pop that open real quick. Last I saw, Joe Mixon's not likely to play. I always like using RotoWorld just as my player news source. I don't know what you guys use. Oh, that's going to make things really, really interesting. I'll dig into that in 1 second. Oh man, this one's going to take a while, guys. Hang in there. Joe Mixon, Amari Cooper, Deontay Johnson, Brian Thomas, Brian Robinson, and Tank Dell. Okay. For the sake of time, I'm not going to dig into each player individually like I usually do, but I will go through my typical process when I'm looking at the game and what to expect there. So, starting with Joe Mixon. First of all, I love his game script. Okay, everything about this game sets up really well for Texans running backs, Texans ball carriers. 7-point favorites, meaning very positive game script. They'll be able to keep the ball on the ground. CJ Stroud in the passing attack won't need to do much to get this victory against the Patriots, theoretically. 22.75 implied total. That's not awesome, but it's not bad either. It's still average, maybe even a little bit above average. So touchdowns should kind of be there. Nothing special there. It's not remarkable. But then you got the Patriots. Patriots are allowing the 11th most PPR points per game to running backs. And again, This is just overall. I always recommend that you double click on the player's name to read how the Patriots are giving up their points. Like, is it the sort of thing where they're really good against the rush, but they're giving up a ton of yardage, a ton of catches, and a ton of running back receiving yards? I always recommend double clicking on the player's name to see where their vulnerability, where their weakness is. But on the surface, not bad. It's a great script, nice matchup. There's a lot to like about that for Joe Mixon. Now, what I wouldn't like for Joe Mixon is it'd be his first game back from an ankle injury. Ankle injuries are scary in fantasy football, just like hamstring injuries, just like so ankle injuries and hamstring injuries are the two, like, they're scary because what you don't want is him to go out, get a carry, and then all of a sudden he's knocked out of the game because, oh, actually I wasn't ready yet, or I re-injured his ankle or whatever. It's going to be tender. It's easier to get hurt again than if it was, say, a hand injury. I don't know. That's a random example. Or even a knee. Like, a knee injury is basically like the knee injury, ACL, MCL, etc., or like a sprain. I don't know. The point is, ankle injuries, scary, risky. We also, unless you know, again, I've unplugged. I haven't looked at the news yet today, but we also don't know that if Joe Mixon played, if he would be limited, right? A lot of times NFL teams bring a player back from injury and they just kind of ease them in. 5 touches, 8 touches, play less than half the offensive snaps. There would be some theoretical risk to Joe Mixon. They got Dameon Pierce back. This game should, quote unquote, should theoretically be an easy, quote unquote, easy win for the Texans. There's no real need to rush Joe Mixon back for this game. It's not like they're going up against the Chiefs or the Bills or anything like that. And if they didn't bring him back for the Bills, so there's some risk there with Joe Mixon. But if we get reports that he's going to be full go, it'd be hard to leave him on the bench. There's a lot to like here. He had 30 plus touches in his first game with the Texans. Amari Cooper, man, that Browns offense is really difficult to have any modicum of faith in right now. Like, everything just looks so dysfunctional with that offense. What we don't love for Amari Cooper, anybody on the Browns, is that their implied total is just 16.5 points. That's going to be bottom 5 among all 28 teams. They're just not expected to score touchdowns, meaning Amari Cooper is going to have to get his points off of targets, catches, and yards. Now, to be fair, that's totally possible because the Browns are nearly 10-point underdogs. These guys are 2-score underdogs on the road, meaning easy win for the Eagles, yes, but severely negative game script for the Browns, likely to get blown out. They're going to have to throw the ball to have a chance in this game if they're going to keep up with or catch up to the Philadelphia Eagles. So Browns are going to be throwing. There should be volume there for Amari Cooper, who, by the way, is already getting 9+ targets per game. I don't know if I'll be able to find it quickly here in Discord, but I recently, actually, it shouldn't be too high up here. I just recently talked about this. Here we go. How bad? By the way, the Discord server, this is where I'm hanging out all day, every day. Like, as I'm studying fantasy football and as I'm finding things, the Discord server is where I'm communicating the unique stats and analysis that I find during all my research. So again, I can't recommend joining the Discord server enough. You can use the links that I've left in the comments, patreon.com/basementbrewedff. But I recently I said, how bad is Deshaun Watson? Consider the fact that Amari Cooper is averaging 9.4 targets per game. He should be balling. You get a wide receiver getting 9+ targets per game in fantasy football. That's usually a really good wide receiver 1 type of numbers. But he's catching 4 of them. He's catching 4 out of more than 9 targets every single game, every single time that Amari Cooper's on the field. That's wild. Anyway, he's already getting a ton of volume. The Browns are expected to get blown out. They're going to have to throw the ball. And the Eagles are allowing plenty of PPR points to wide receivers, just like they did last year. They're getting smacked around by wide receiver. Like, we're not expecting touchdowns, but it's totally fair to expect catches and yards from Amari Cooper. There's a lot to like about Amari Cooper's setup. Deontay Johnson, we talked about a little bit already. He's getting a ton of targets with Andy Dalton. Love that for him. The Panthers are they actually have a low implied total, but it's still better than the Browns. And they are 6.5-point underdogs. They're going to have to throw the ball, and he's got a good matchup. So there's a lot to like about Deontay Johnson. Brian Thomas, the Jaguars Bears, that game is very, it sets up as a very mediocre game. Like there's nothing that's exciting or terrifying about the over under, the spread, the implied totals. Like if you had to pick a game that's meh, could get points, could be boring, it's Bears Jaguars. What we don't like for Brian Thomas is that the Bears are absolutely suffocating quarterbacks, and as a result, wide receivers aren't doing too well either. They're quote-unquote allowing the 26th most PPR points per game among 32 teams. In other words, they're holding wide receivers to the 7th fewest PPR points per game. Brian Thomas is balling. He looks like one of the best rookies in this class. He's doing really well. He's going to get better and better and better as the year goes on. But given the other options, he'd be out. He'd be the odd man out here, in my opinion. Brian Robinson. Again, I have not caught up on the news. His outlook was looking bleak. Like last I saw, Brian Robinson, let me just pop it up here. Let's research together. Not images. I don't need Brian Robinson images. Robinson, likely game time decision. I don't know. Last I saw, he was missing practice left and right. He didn't seem like a really good bet to play. I also don't love that the Commanders are 6.5-point underdogs. The Ravens are really tough on running backs. Brian Robinson he played last week and he scored 2 touchdowns, but he didn't get a ton of volume. He might not get a ton of volume here. I would not feel comfortable with Brian Robinson in my lineup at all. And then we got Tank Dell. Tank Dell. So Nico Collins is on IR. I don't want to talk about that. It's devastating. What we don't love for Tank Dell is what we did love for Joe Mixon. It's that the Texans are 7-point favorites. Theoretically, there's not going to be, this is the other part. The Texans have an implied total of just 15.75 points. So fewer than 16 points, meaning like the Texans theoretically should be able to win this game with just running the ball and just pure defense. Their defense should be able to secure a pretty easy W here. The point is, CJ Stroud in the passing attack just might not ask to be do too much, plain and simple. Now, Nico Collins being out, that frees up, I think, 10 plus targets per game. And all right, I said I wouldn't go into these, but I do want to bring something up that I mentioned in the heat map. So let me pull up Tank Dell real quick. Game number 7, Tank Dell. Now, here's what I want to, where is it? Here we go. Nico Collins is out for the next 4 games at least, which frees up a whopping 10.8, basically 11 targets per game that need to find new homes. That's a potentially big boost for Tank Dell if he can get out of the field in 2 wide receiver sets. And that's a little bit concerning because last week, Xavier Hutchinson actually played more offensive snaps with 48 than Tank Dell did with 46. He was theoretically on the field more than Tank Dell was. I'm not expecting that to be the case going forward, but it's at least something that's worth watching and keeping an eye on. Now, after 4 games with Stephon Diggs in town, Tank Dell is averaging a disappointing 5.3 targets, 3.3 catches, 41.8 yards, no touchdowns, and 7.4 PPR points per game. Now, last year, right, it's important to remember that last year, I'm having trouble finding it with all the data that's in there. Last year, Stephon Diggs wasn't in the picture, and Tank Dell balled out. He went absolutely nuts. So it's reasonable for us to expect with Nico Collins, he's not Stephon Diggs, but they've lost one of the big 3 wide receivers. Last year, there was only 2, and Tank Dell went nuts. And now you got Nico Collins and his 10-plus targets per game that are up for grabs. It's very reasonable to expect Tank Dell to start progressing forward. So at the end of the day, to answer the question, I would not feel good about Brian Robinson. I'd feel just fine about Brian Thomas. Not good, not great, not bad, not terrible. It really comes down to whether or not Joe Mixon is going to be playing and whether or not he's going to be limited. So I would recommend keeping an ear out and an eye on the player news tab of the Discord server, because this is where we all communicate. We keep in touch with each other. Maybe there's something in here right now. Neighbors is out, Wandale season, blah, blah, blah. But keep an eye on the player news channel of the Discord server to know, okay, is Joe Mixon going to play? Is he going to be limited? Let's assume for just the sake of this particular question that Joe Mixon is active and he's full go. He's not going to be limited. You lock him in. He's definitely the choice, and I would lock him in with Amari Cooper and Deontay Johnson. If Joe Mixon is limited or inactive, then for me, it's Amari Cooper, Deontay Johnson, and Tank Dell. Brian Thomas and Brian Robinson would be the odd men out in this scenario. Although I understand playing Brian Thomas over Amari Cooper just based on results up to this point. But at some point, something's got to give for Amari Cooper. I mean, again, dude's getting 9+ targets per game. Browns are going to be throwing the ball. Eagles give up production to wide receivers. At some point, something's got to give. And I'd be okay with... Ask yourself if you're okay with rolling the dice on another clunker from Amari Cooper in exchange for big-time upside. And if that's the case, I'd be going with Amari Cooper. So, Mixon in, it's Mixon, Cooper, and Deontay for me. Mixon out, it's Amari Cooper, Deontay, and Tank Dell. So, Amari Cooper and Deontay and whatever Texan makes sense. Hopefully that helps. Whew. Man, all right, let's keep it going. Micah, my guy Micah, I hope you've been well, man. I haven't... it was awesome running into you at the card show many months ago. It feels like it was forever ago. Are you rolling with Kirk Cousins as they might have the offense figured out or taking upside with Anthony Richardson? Yeah, so one thing to just note about Kirk Cousins is he threw the ball more than 50 times last week. That's not going to happen every week, but yeah, either way, encouraging step forward for the Falcons offense. This week, the Falcons, again, kind of like we were talking about with the Texans, they just might not have to throw the ball that much. 6.5-point favorites over the Panthers. Now, he does have a really high implied point total. You always want to see that with a quarterback. You want a quarterback that has a high implied point total or a quarterback that's going to run the ball a ton, which is the other part of this question. And he does have a good matchup. The Panthers given up the 8th most fantasy points per game. So really the only threat to Kirk Cousins here is whether or not he will need to do much to secure the win. Then you got Anthony Richardson. You ask about rolling the dice on him. I mean, yeah, it's definitely concerning because A, he hasn't been playing well. B, he's coming off injury. C, he might be without Michael Pittman and or Josh Downs. Like, there's a lot of red flags to Anthony Richardson, but it's also the sort of thing where you just can't deny the upside. We've seen it in the past. We've seen the upside. I wrote Game 6. Let's find Anthony Richardson real quick. He's averaging 17.9 fantasy points per game in just 5 full career NFL contests. He scored 20. He has 3 games of 20 or more fantasy points, but fewer than 10 points in the other 2. So he's boom or bust. He's either getting you more than 20 or less than 10. And that's concerning. So this, by the way, Micah, this is one where you could ask yourself, okay, do I need like what feels like safety? Actually, ignore that because there's not necessarily anything that's safe about Kirk Cousins. He's fallen through in the past too. So, I mean, in that case, there's nothing to like about his matchup either. The Titans are always, they're tough on quarterbacks this year. They got a nice defense. I mean, if you're going for the ultimate upside play, it has to be Richardson because of who Richardson is as a quarterback and what he does in fantasy football. Like he's always been considered a little bit of a cheat code because of his legs. But I mean, there's plenty of upside to Kirk Cousins this week too, with the high implied total. Great matchup. If Andy Dalton can keep them competitive, this game could turn into a little bit of a shootout where that's unlikely with Colts Titans. I think there's plenty of upside to both these options. This is one where it's a good problem to have. So this is one where A, toss it into the start sit channel if you haven't already. I haven't looked. B, let me grab a sip of this beautiful, beautiful Mexican lager and make that decision. All right. If it was me, and this is my league, understanding this might not be the right call, I'm going with Kirk Cousins. But I'm telling you, it's like 51-49%. Like 51% in favor of Kirk. In fact, Micah, I know you're in the Discord server. Hit me up on Sunday morning and we'll see if I have a different answer. But as of right now, I'd be going with Kirk if it was me. My guy Tanner's in here. Drop your comments. Mikey will try to hit as many as possible. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you, sir. Thank you for calling out the like and subscribe. I got to tell you guys, building a business, building an audience, by far the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. It's wild how hard it is to convince people to follow you, let alone purchase your product and purchase the tool that you create. So I appreciate Tanner in here reminding people to actually hit the subscribe button. There's a lot of people that like see my stuff on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, but they don't actually hit the follow button. It's like, how do I capture that? But anyway, appreciate that, man. All right, here we go. I don't know what that guy's talking about, so I'm just gonna move on. Ma'am says, gave a recommendation for Mikey, and I actually won a game with Mikey's Genius Heat Maps. I don't know who Ma'am is, but man, I really appreciate, or Ma'am, I should say. Ma'am, I appreciate this comment. This is the stuff that's heartwarming and keeps me going, right? There's a lot of tough days as a business owner and entrepreneur. So getting stuff like this is, honest to goodness, this is the stuff that like I'll take screenshots and send to my wife. Like, yeah, we're doing well. Like everything's going well. So appreciate that. Let's see what else we got. Jordan says, that's a steal. California beers are a lot more than that. Oh my God. This is how far behind on the comments I am. That was from 12:30 and it's almost 1:30. My goodness. Yeah, that's totally a steal. $4.99 for a beer. Even in Wisconsin, like you could barely get a Miller Lite, which is barely beer, for $4.99. All right, here we go. Dable said, we'll see. Oh, thank you. This is from 1 hour ago, 2 hours ago now. Thank you, Adam. Dable said, we'll see when asked about the status of Singletary. That doesn't. Great. I love when coaches do that. Michael Rollmeyer said, held Tank because of your last year assessment in my Dynasty League, looking to pay dividends. Let's go, man. It's Tank Bigsby season. I'm sorry, Michael, that I was 1 year too soon, but finally, it's Tank Bigsby season. Here we go. Let's keep it going. Is James Cook and T. Higgins too much for CD? It depends on a lot of things. Like, I don't know if this is an 8-team league, a 14-team league. How many running backs do you start? How many wide receivers do you start? Is it PPR, not PPR? How deep is the bench? How active is the league? All of those things matter. In a vacuum and on the surface, I don't think that's too much. It's probably slightly too much. It's not the sort of thing that if I saw the trade go through in my league, I'd be like, whoa, this either side got ripped off. I wouldn't feel that way. I'd be like, oh, all right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's very balanced. So if the question is whether or not it's too much, it's not too much. It might be slightly on the high side, but it's not like there's nothing about it that screams robbery one way or another. Chai wants to know, where does Darius Slayton sit after Malik Neighbors ruled out? So the cool thing about the heat map is that I always go through on Saturday. So Saturday mornings, I have to wake up early, coach my kids' flag football team, then coach my daughter's soccer team, and then coach my other kids. I have 2 kids. Coach my son's flag football team, daughter's soccer team, and then my son's soccer team. And then we grab lunch. And then after that, I sit back down with the heat map, go through everybody that's highlighted, go through all the player news, and update all this. So while I published it on Thursday, it's completely fresh on Saturday and Sunday. Obviously, I haven't gone in yet and done Darius Slayton. Now, I will say Darius Slayton balled out last week. He's certainly trending, I guess. He can't really trend off one game, but he's trending in the right direction. And the Giants are going to have to throw the ball. They're underdogs. It's a potential shootout with the Bengals. Bengals defense looks not great. Like, their defense is atrocious. I mean, Darius Slayton is going to be on the wide receiver 4/flex line. He's in consideration as a wide receiver 4/flex in week 6 fantasy football. And I'll dive a little bit deeper into the details when I update the heat map on Saturday. Minimal thinking, which is so impossible for me. I don't think that's a thing. Off the top of your head, what's your favorite drafters lineup for this week? Oh my God. You can't ask that question, Jordan, and then say minimal thinking. That's impossible. I have no idea, but I appreciate the question. By the way, if you're like, what the heck is drafters? Drafters is awesome, because if you love fantasy football drafts, which is my favorite part about fantasy football, before the season, you can do best ball drafts, and during the season, you do weekly drafts. So it's you against 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, however many. And instead of like FanDuel or DraftKings, where everybody theoretically could have Patrick Mahomes if they wanted to, this is an actual draft for the week. So if somebody takes Patrick Mahomes, you can't. You have to find a different quarterback. By the way, if you're ever interested in trying out drafters, if you enter promo code BBFF, they will 100% match your first deposit up to $100. So like, go ahead, give it a try. There's free money for you to play with. Off the top of my head, man, I'd be targeting players in the A column of the heat map. Again, this column is for players where like all of the data suggests an absolute eruption. Like, everything is perfect this week for Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Bijan Robinson. I'd be looking at column B and trying to get players that have a blue dot. Terry McLaurin is on that list. Josh Jacobs is on that list because of touchdown regression. CeeDee Lamb is on that list. Malik Neighbors is on that list. Sad face. What the heck, Malik Neighbors? Whatever. But I'd pretty much only be targeting players in this list and this list if I were doing a draft. I have not done my drafters drafts yet. I usually do that on like Saturday night-ish when I'm just kind of hanging around. All right. Jacob Sens says, injuries and buys have absolutely smoked me. I'm currently starting Jacobs and Irving. Jacobs I'd feel really good about. Marvin Harrison, JSN, didn't do much yesterday, unfortunately. Chase Brown, I'd feel good about if Zach Moss sits. Was feeling good with White Moss injuries, but Moss is cleared. Okay, well, that answers that question. Ugh, that's frustrating. Still think Brown is good. Yeah, Chase Brown is definitely still going to be an RB3/flex at worst. Like, he got plenty involved against the Ravens last week with Zach Moss in the lineup. The Bengals are favored. They're going to be able, like, it's a positive game script for Cincinnati. They should be able to keep the ball on the ground. So Chase Brown's definitely not useless. He's going to be on the RB3/flex radar, especially if continue to keep an eye on the news, because it's possible that Zach Moss is limited and doesn't get his usual workload, considering he is dinged up, he is banged up. But I'd still feel okay about Chase Brown. I just wouldn't. It's obviously just not as exciting as it was without Zach Moss. Yeah, I feel you, Jacob. Neighbors is out. Kyron's on bye. Rashee Rice, Nico Collins. I once had an insane team. I feel you, man. It's this year. I feel like I say this every year, but this year in particular is like, I don't know if you're religious, but please help me pray to God that he turns injuries off like it's Madden. Just turn it off. We don't need injuries. Nobody needs injuries. Let's turn it off and let's move on. All right. Jesse says, Tolbert, Darius Slayton, or Alex Pierce for a flex spot. Okay. I'm trying to ignore my love of Jalen Tolbert this week so that I can give Darius Slayton realistic thought and Alec Pierce realistic thought. Darius Slayton's not over Jalen Tolbert. Like, obviously Slayton gets a big bump, but Jalen Tolbert, like, Giants are projected for 22.5. Cowboys are projected for 24. Tolbert is playing against a team allowing the second most PPR points. Slayton is playing against a team with the 14th most points. Tolbert is tied to Dak Prescott. Slayton is tied to Daniel Jones. Like if I were to make a side-by-side list, Tolbert would get the check on every single one. Darius Slayton would get none of them. So Slayton would be out. Alec Pierce, what Alec Pierce is doing this season is wild. Like the guy doesn't get targets, but when he does, he gets like a 40-yard touchdown. It's wild. It's also wildly unsustainable. I saw that Michael Pittman returned to practice. Just weird because he's supposed to miss multiple weeks. So I have to catch up on the news there. If there's a scenario where both Michael Pittman and Josh Downs do not play, that suddenly makes Alec Pierce significantly more intriguing. Like he would be the team's wide receiver one. But man, he's going to look at this. The Titans are holding opposing wide receivers to the fewest PPR points per game. Like there's no other defense in football that has allowed fewer, I just confused myself, PPR points than the Tennessee Titans. So anyway, if it's me, it's Jalen Tolbert, and it feels pretty like I feel good about that decision. That's not particularly close, in my opinion. My guy Tanner joined the Discord today with over 150 fantasy football players like you today. Costs less than one beer. I mean, the guy's absolutely correct. It costs less than a beer. $4.99 a month. There's 200 fantasy football players in there now. Tank Dell predictions. I got you, my friend. I think we already actually talked about some of this, right? I'll fly through it. We'll make it a quick one. First of all, the game itself, not necessarily exciting. Texans are fine. They're favorites. Ultimately, the Texans' passing attack just might not be asked to do too much. Now, Tank Dell's not doing much since Stephon Diggs came to town. He's getting just 5.3 targets, but of course, Nico Collins is out for the next 4 games, freeing up a whopping 10.8 targets per game that need to find new homes. That's potentially a big boost for Tank Dell if he can get onto the field in 2 wide receiver sets. That said, like I mentioned, Xavier Hutchinson actually played a ton of snaps. I wouldn't say that's a threat to Tank Dell, but I would recommend adding Xavier Hutchinson if he's going to start getting full-time snaps in CJ Stroud's offense. The Pats are a slightly optimistic matchup for wide receivers, holding them to the 10th fewest touchdowns, but allowing the 5th most catches, 10th most yards, and 12th most PPR points. 2 different wide receivers, DK Metcalf and JSN, have scored more than 23 points against the Pats, but they're also the only 2 wide receivers this season to reach 15 points against New England. Jamar Chase, Andre Ioshvas, Tyler Lockett, Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, all of those guys came up short of 15 points, although many of them landed between 10 and 15, which I think is a reasonable expectation for Tank Dell. Ultimately, it's going to come down to whether or not he finds the end zone. He's not likely to rack up catches and yards, but I think he's a good bet. Without Nico Collins, Tank Dell's a good bet for 5 catches, 80 yards, and hopefully a touchdown. Hopefully that helps. Flex Amari Cooper or Austin Eckler, if no Brian Robinson, PPR. Yeah, man, I would say, like, if no Brian Robinson, that's going to lock Austin Eckler into an RB2 role. He's going to, like, we know he can kill it as a pass catcher. The Commanders are underdogs, so they might have to throw the ball. It'd be really hard to ignore Austin Eckler if Brian Robinson doesn't play. We already talked about Amari Cooper, 9+ targets, great matchup. He's going to hit at some point like he did a couple weeks ago. But Eckler is going to offer a similar ceiling at a better floor if Brian Robinson's out. So I'd probably go Eckler there. All right, what else? What's next? Flex. Dontavian Wicks, Roma Dunze, Rashid Shaheed, or Rashawn Johnson. I love Dontavian Wicks this week. The Packers-Cardinals game, just in general, that's one that I want to get exposure to. High-scoring game. Packers have an implied total of 26.5. Solid matchup. It's not scary. It's not exciting. Just a decent matchup. Dontavian Wicks is getting hella targets without Christian Watson. He's getting a ton of targets with Christian Watson. Game number 8. Here we go. He's 20 targets in the last 2 games, but he's only caught 7. He's caught 7 of 20 targets. Like, imagine the numbers this dude would have if he just caught the ball. 98 yards, 2 touchdowns. He scored nearly 25 points on 13 targets in week 4, but then just 4 points on 7 targets in week 5. For what it's worth, in 4 games that Christian Watson did not play between weeks 14 and 18 last season, Dontavian Wicks averaged 5+ targets, 4 catches, 51+ yards, and had 3 touchdowns that averaged 13.7 PPR points per game. He scored fewer than 11 points in 2 of those 4 games, but also 15 or more points in the other 2 games, including 24.1 in week 18. So just like we've already seen this year, when he scored 24.8 points, but then 4 points, he's very, very boom or bust as an option. And I would really only want to use him in games like this one, where it does offer some shootout potential. This game could turn into a shootout, which would make Dontavian Wicks appetizing as a wide receiver or as an option in fantasy football. Cardinals are a mediocre foe for wide receivers. They're allowing the 12th most catches, 13th most yards, but they're holding wide receivers to the 14th fewest touchdowns and 16th fewest PPR points per game. Just 3 wide receivers in 5 games have been able to reach 15 or more PPR points against the Cardinals, 2 of which scored 20 or more. Generally speaking, I feel optimistic. I feel good about having Dontavian Wicks in my lineup. If I had to make a decision of, do I want Wicks in or out? I would want Wicks in. I'd feel good about having him in my lineup. Now, Rome Odunze, it's really hard to ignore the fact that the Jaguars are getting absolutely destroyed by wide receivers. They are, let me scroll down on Rome here. They are hemorrhaging the 3rd most catches, 2nd most yards, 8th most touchdowns, and most PPR points per game. 8 different wide receivers in just 5 games have scored 14 or more PPR points against the Jaguars, 3 of which scored more than 22. Like, they are getting absolutely destroyed by wide receivers. But here's a problem. In 3 games that Keenan Allen has played with the Bears, Rome Odunze is averaging just 4.3 targets, so barely enough volume to be relevant, 2.3 catches, 20+ yards, no touchdowns, and 4.4 PPR points per game. He scored fewer than 10 in all 3 of those games that Keenan Allen was active. Now, I'm not saying that Keenan Allen being active is an automatic death threat for Rome Odunze. He's way too talented to just expect him to do nothing all season. Like, the dude is going to erupt at some point. He's just going to randomly pop up for a big game, but at this point, it's pretty impossible to predict, and it's not likely when Keenan Allen is in the lineup. So if I have an option of Rome Odunze or Dontavian Wicks this week in particular, I would be taking Dontavian Wicks, just given the opportunity that he has in the game that he's in, the possible shootout of it. Then you got Rashawn Johnson. Rashawn Johnson is getting enough volume, particularly at the goal line, to be on the RB3 flex radar, but he's still way, way, way behind DeAndre Swift in the pecking order in terms of volume. He's not a sure thing to get that work. I would be going with Dontavian Wicks in this situation. Hopefully that helps. All right, what else we got? I'm going to try and make these pretty quick, and we're going to wrap this up candidly because I have to use the restroom. Scorpio said, thanks for the advice, man. I subbed. Hey, I appreciate that, man. Thank you so much. Seriously, thank you. Really appreciate that. Like, getting subscribers and getting an audience and making sales, all of that stuff feels so impossible. How are we feeling about Ogunbowale as a flex against New England? I wouldn't feel good about that at all. If Joe Mixon plays, he's not even an option. Even if Joe Mixon doesn't play, it sounds like Dameon Pierce will. Dameon Pierce is going to be, in all likelihood, the preferred option. Ogunbowale got a ton of touches last week. I don't expect that to happen again this week. Donnie says, thank you. No, sir. Thank you. Is it okay to drop Zach Charbonnet for Bucky? Yes, that's okay. But I would do you have other options? Because Zach Charbonnet is a potential RB2 with RB1 upside if anything happened to Kenneth Walker. But it's definitely okay to drop him for now because Bucky Irving is an RB2 with RB1 upside if anything happens to Rachaad White, but he also has standalone flex value. So if I had to roster one or the other, I'll take Bucky. I'm just curious if there's anybody else you could drop so that you can hang on to Zach Charbonnet. Great Big Dog 69, which has that's obviously a great name. Wants to know thoughts on Shaheed this week. Well, let me tell you my thoughts on Shaheed this week. I'll tell you one thing, they're not going to be great without Derek Carr, but let's look anyway. Game number 4, Rashid Shaheed. I have him in the yellow column with a yellow dot, meaning, don't feel particularly good about it. Now, the game itself, well, first of all, TLDR, bottom line, I'm treating him as a questionable wide receiver 3 without Derek Carr, and that might be a little bit too optimistic. I hate to say it. Buccaneers at Saints has an over-under of just 41.5 points, which is the 5th lowest among all 14 games on the Week 6 slate. Both teams are sporting bottom 14 implied totals, making this game look like a low-scoring affair that won't feature very many fantasy football fireworks. The Saints have an implied total of just 19 points, tied for the 5th fewest among all 28 teams on the Week 6 slate. Doesn't figure to be many touchdowns or fantasy football on the Saints side without Derek Carr. Now, obviously, Rashid Shaheed himself is absolutely balling. Dude is going nuts. 6.8 targets per game, nearly 4 catches, 73 yards. He's got 3 touchdowns, and he's getting you dang near 15 PPR points per game. In fact, in that fantasy football Discord server that I mentioned, I can't remember, where did I drop that? That had to be in player analysis, maybe in heat map. Here it is. Dude is right up there with Chris Olave, right? Chris Olave is the former 11th overall pick in the NFL draft. 28 targets, 22 catches, 275 yards, 1 touchdown, 11.2 PPR points per game. And then you got undrafted free agent Rashid Shaheed, who has more targets, 6 more targets, 3 less catches, more yards, more touchdowns, more PPR points per game, right? We're talking about Chris Olave, who went in the 2nd round of fantasy football drafts, and Rashid Shaheed, who went in the 10th round of fantasy football drafts. Weird that I know that off the top of my head. So anyway, dude is absolutely balling, but he's going from Derek Carr to Spencer Rattler at quarterback, which is most likely not a good thing. Now, Spencer Rattler could YOLO ball it and just chuck it up, and that's what we need to hope for. But ultimately, there's just no way to feel good about going from Derek Carr to Spencer Rattler. It's not like we're not seeing that news and be like, oh, that's an upgrade. Right? Like last week when Anthony Richardson went from Richardson to Joe Flacco, all of a sudden Michael Pittman and Josh Downs became intriguing because of the quarterback change. It's the opposite here with the Saints. Now, the matchup is good. The Buccaneers are giving up the 3rd most catches, 7th most yards, 14th most touchdowns, 7th most PPR points per game to wide receivers. 6 in 5 games have scored 13 or more against Tampa, but just 3 have been able to reach 15. Drake London and Darnell Mooney both went insane last week against these very same Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They both scored more than 31 PPR points against the Bucs, but again, Kirk Cousins threw the ball more than 50 times. Spencer Rattler can't or shouldn't throw the ball more than 50 times. So, all in all, my thoughts on Rashid Shaheed, I don't love him. If somebody were to say, hey, everything else put to the side, do you want Rashid Shaheed in your fantasy football lineup this week? I would say no. Start Ray Davis or Tank Bigsby. Man, I really got to catch up on injury news because last I saw, James Cook hadn't practiced. It's the sort of thing where if James Cook is in, then it's Tank Bigsby. If James Cook is out, then it's Ray Davis. That's pretty simple. What 2 wide receivers would you trade for Neighbors out of these? Options: Deontay Johnson, Devontae Smith, T. Higgins, Brian Thomas Jr., or DJ Moore. I would trade Brian Thomas Jr. plus, I wouldn't want to lose Deontay Smith or Higgins, although, yeah, I wouldn't want to lose Deontay Smith or Higgins, and I guess DJ Moore. Brian Thomas and DJ Moore would be my 2 if it meant acquiring Malik Neighbors. I need help. I'm so cooked. Why isn't this? There we go. Who do I start? RB2 Bucky or Bigsby? Again, this is one of those things where it's like if Rashad White misses the game, then you got to go with Tank for sure. 100% go with Tank. If not, man, if Rashad White is going to play, I would honestly go with Tank Bigsby. I would. It's a better matchup. It's a neutral game script. The guy is balling. Bucky Irving's playing really well too, but man, that matchup's tough. Hold on, let me take this final sip of Mexican lager, which is probably a sign that we should wrap this up. If it were me and I had to make that choice, I don't know. I have to look at the heat map real quick. Give me 1 second. I want to look at the matchup. I already know about what Bucky Irving is doing. Tough on running backs. They've been tough on running backs. Yeah. I don't know. It's hard to feel really excited about Bucky Irving. Whereas Tank Bigsby, there is that optimism there. There's that excitement. It's like if I put Bucky Irving in my lineup, I feel a little bit like gross. I don't feel good about it because of the matchup and the difficulty of the matchup. Whereas if I put Tank Bigsby in my lineup, there's that like, what could be? Like, get the volume, get the carries, and here's what could be, especially when you look at his matchup, right? The Bears do get beat by running backs so far. Like, they're great against the pass, but they're not particularly great against running backs. Averaging the 9th most catches. Yeah, we already talked about all this. So, I personally, and again, this is one of those where it's like 51-49. It's so close. It's not an obvious answer. Some of these I get and I'm like, oh yeah, that one. This one's not one of those. Like, I feel like I could flip flop on this all day. Forced to choose, I would be going with Bigsby and the upside that's there. Hopefully that helps. Very good chance that that's the incorrect answer. But again, this one's a 50-50. Bucky, for what it's worth, Bucky Irving is going to be a much safer play than Tank Bigsby because he's getting that guaranteed volume. He's been getting the volume all year. Tank Bigsby has not. Tank Bigsby's surgence is new. So you're gambling that the Jaguars, after finally winning, go back to what worked last week, and that was big part of that was giving Tank Bigsby the ball. So if you can stomach the risk, I'm going with Bigsby. But if you're like, no, I can't handle the risk, give me the safer play, then it's Bucky Irving. All right. Would you do Chubb, Mason, and Waddle for Tyreek? I wouldn't. No. I would not do that. Well, this whole thing depends on when Christian McCaffrey comes back. But that's too expensive for me. I mean, Jalen Waddle, like with Tyreek, you're betting on Tua coming back, which would also be the case for Waddle. And if Tua comes back, that's good for both guys. But Waddle, that'd be like trading. Like, Waddle is still going to produce. So then you're throwing in Jordan Mason, who obviously has huge upside as the 49ers RB1 for now. Depends what's going on with Christian McCaffrey. But Christian McCaffrey's sounds like he'll be a re-injury risk for the whole rest of the year. Like, I'm not in any sort of rush. I know Christian McCaffrey's on his way back, but I'm not in any sort of rush to trade Jordan Mason. And then you got Nick Chubb, who is going to take some time to get ramped up, and maybe he won't be himself at all this year. But Dr. Deepak Chona has talked about Chubb doing a 4-game ramp up in terms of volume, which means by week 10, 11, 12, we could start seeing vintage Nick Chubb volume. To me, this is too much for Tyreek. And it would be different if like maybe one of those players weren't in there. I could also maybe do Mason for Nico Collins. I mean, yeah, I'm fine with that, but I did see a report that Nico Collins could be out up to 6 weeks, which, I mean, that's a lot of fantasy football season to be missing out on. Joshua Loyola said, start 2 at flex, Tank Dell, J.K. Dobbins, my guy, and Brian Thomas Jr. So we talked about Tank Dell more than once. We haven't really dug into Brian Thomas, though he's come up a couple times. So let's dive in here real quick. I'm treating him as a high-end wide receiver 3. He's an emerging stud wide receiver. Tough matchup in week 6. Now, the game itself, again, it's very mediocre. There's nothing especially scary or exciting about this game. Brian Thomas is doing really well. He has 2 low target games, but that was weeks 1 and 2. He has 3 high target games in the last 3 games. He's averaging 6.8 targets, 4.4 catches, 82 yards, and he has 3 touchdowns to average 16.2 PPR points per game. Dude is balling, especially over the last 3 games in particular. He has 8 or 9 targets in each of the last 3 games. He has 21 to 24 points in each of the last 2 games. Like I said, dude is balling. Now, Evan Ingram is coming back, or at least should be back in week 6. That's going to add at least some level of target competition. That's like Evan Ingram coming back is not a good thing for Brian Thomas. It's not even close to a death sentence, but it's not a good thing. The matchup itself, the Bears have been tough on wide receivers. They're holding them to the 11th fewest catches, 12th fewest yards, 3rd fewest touchdowns, and 7th fewest PPR points per game. Nico Collins scored 27.5 points against the Bears in week 2, but he is the only wide receiver to register even just 13 PPR points against the Bears this year. Nico Collins. He's the only one to score 13 against Chicago. Calvin Ridley, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, Deontay Johnson, and Rams wide receivers, not Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp, but all of those guys came up short of 13 PPR points against the Bears. They are tough on wide receivers, and part of that is because they're really, really tough on quarterbacks. J.K. Dobbins is somebody that I do actually really, really like this week in particular. What team? Chargers, sorry. Blanked there for a second. J.K. Dobbins, volume-based RB2, difficult matchup though. So like Brian Thomas, there's a very difficult matchup here. We like the script of this game. We don't like that it's low scoring. We don't like that the Chargers have an implied total of just 19 points, but we do like that the Chargers are 2.5 point favorites in this game because that suggests a neutral, if not a positive, game script that's going to allow Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman to do what they love to do, which is keep the football on the ground as much as possible. In other words, J.K. Dobbins there's not much of a threat for J.K. Dobbins to miss out on volume. He should get plenty of rushing opportunities in this game. And he's done well with them so far. He's averaging 16.5 touches and 15.2 PPR points per game. Now, we mentioned that the matchup is tough. The Broncos, they are holding them to the 13th fewest rushing yards, 12th fewest receiving yards, 11th fewest touchdowns, and 9th fewest PPR points per game. And that's despite allowing the 15th most touches and 12th most catches. So they're allowing volume, but they're shutting it down once the running back gets the ball. 8 running backs in 5 games have handled at least 10 touches against the Broncos, 3 of which handled 17 or more. Among them, just one was able to reach 15 PPR points, and he scored 18.9. Never getting over 19. That was Kenneth Walker. He scored 18.9 PPR points, but he needed 22 touches to get there against the Broncos, and that was way back in week 1. No other running back has been able to reach 15 PPR points. That's concerning for J.K. Dobbins. So, starting 2 at flex, which I don't think I caught that at first. I thought we were only picking 1. If it's me, the much safer bets, the safer plays would be J.K. Dobbins and Brian Thomas. Like J.K. Dobbins would be locked in this decision. Then it comes down to Brian Thomas versus Tank Dell. Brian Thomas is going to be a safer play just given the raw target volume that he's getting over the last 3 games. Tank Dell, we still don't really know what that's going to look like without Nico Collins, although it's nothing but optimistic. Like Nico Collins' 10 plus targets per game is missing. But again, Xavier Hutchinson played plenty. Texans shouldn't have to throw the ball. I personally would be going with, if this was me and I had to make this decision for myself, I'd be going with J.K. Dobbins and Brian Thomas. Hope that helps. Been too long. Glad you're doing well. Glad you are doing well. Good, sir. Thank you. 14-team PPR league flex spot. Antonio Gibson, A.D. Mitchell, Dalton Schultz. Thoughts on Kimani Vidal? I love Kimani Vidal, but he's not an actual option in week 6 fantasy football. But I love Kimani. I was banging the table for him all offseason. I was excited about him going to the Chargers after the draft. Like I did a whole episode on it. But he's not an option in week 6. Gibson, what's going on with Ramondre Stevenson? Is he going to, if Ramondre Stevenson is going to miss this game, then it's Gibson. For sure it's Gibson. If Stevenson's going to play, Gibson's obviously much less exciting. it's the same thing with Mitchell. Is Michael Pittman and Josh Downs, are both of those guys going to be out? If so, A.D. Mitchell is at worst the number 2 option in the Colts passing attack, and he's going to be much more exciting. Dalton Schultz could be a beneficiary of Nico Collins being out. So this one's a really tough decision. It's one of those where it's like, I wish we weren't doing the show on Friday. I wish it was Sunday morning. I highly recommend keeping an eye on the news. Again, we do have a player news column, a player news category in my fantasy football Discord server. If Ramondre's out, it's Gibson. Regardless of the other options, it's Gibson. If Ramondre's in, then it would be Mitchell is only an option if Josh Downs and Michael Pittman miss. Both of those guys need to miss. Otherwise, I wouldn't consider Mitchell in this decision. Schultz is an option. I don't like flexing tight ends, but he's an option without Nico Collins. So let me just recap. If Ramondre sits, the answer is automatically Gibson. If Ramondre plays, Gibson is still an option, but Mitchell would be the preferred choice if Michael Pittman and Josh Downs do not play. If one of those guys play, Mitchell is not an option, and then it's Schultz. Did that make sense? I feel like I made that more confusing, but there's like a whole tree where each guy could be the decision. Hopefully that helps. Hopefully that helps. Boston Rebels. Do I trade Connor? Sorry, I got distracted by the picture of, is that Dwayne The Rock Johnson? Do I trade James Conner and a piece? Is that Alec Pierce? That might be Alec Pierce. For Mixon, he fully trained today. Oh, see, that's a really good sign for Mixon. Also, do I drop Josh Downs for Ladd McConkey? All right, so I totally if it's a piece, it totally depends on what the piece is. If it's Alec Pierce, then I'm fine with trading James Conner and Alec Pierce for Joe Mixon. I really like James Conner. I wouldn't be in a rush to trade him, but Joe Mixon's got big time upside if he is healthy and fully healthy, not like limited. Drop Josh Downs for Ladd. Man, I love Josh Downs as a player, but with Anthony Richardson playing quarterback, I'd be fine dropping Josh Downs to get Ladd. It's funny because I like Josh Downs and I like Ladd McConkey. I don't like Josh Downs with Anthony Richardson. I don't like any Chargers receiver that's in Greg Roman's offense, so I don't feel particularly excited about both of those guys. But long-term, Ladd McConkey is going to be the better option because he has wide receiver 1 upside in that offense, whereas Josh Downs is going to be number 2 in a run-heavy offense with Anthony Richardson. So I'd be fine with that. Who should I start? Wicks, Sermon, or Keenan this week in my flex? Wicks against the Cardinals. Lots of upsides there. I would automatically take him over Keenan. Then the question is Trace Sermon, which largely depends on Jonathan Taylor. If Jonathan Taylor sits, Trey Sermon is going to feel much safer because of the guaranteed volume. The Colts are locked into what should be a pretty even game. Really tough matchup with the Titans. Ultimately, what I'm saying is there's not a lot to be excited about Trey Sermon this week, other than the fact that he would get 15-ish touches if Jonathan Taylor sits. Other than that, there's a lot of upside to Dontavian Wicks this week in particular with the possible shootout and assuming Christian Watson sits again. All right, guys, I think I got to wrap this up. We're 2 hours in. I gotta go potty. Okay. I really appreciate all these questions and I'm sorry. Well, actually I'm really close to getting through. I'm pretty close. So let's just keep going. Here we go. Adrian B. I have to drop a Packer. Well, that's an issue already. Dropping Dontavian Wicks or Watson, full PPR redraft. It totally depends on if this is a this week or long-term thing. Like long-term, it's Christian Watson. This week, it's Dontavian Wicks. So I don't know I don't know if that helps you, but Christian Watson has big upside. And he won't be out too much longer. I mean, technically, there's a chance he plays this week, but it probably won't be this week. But he could be back next week. So if you have to drop one and you don't need Dontavian Wicks this week, then Wicks is the one to drop there. Allen or Prescott? Are we talking Josh Allen? Because if you got Josh Allen, you don't bench Josh Allen. Josh Allen is the answer. Although, dude, I mean, shoot, if there's a week, I mean, if you really want to roll the dice, if there is any week to bench Josh Allen, it would be against the Jets. Although he actually has really good career history against the Jets. I documented that in the heat map here. But the Jets, man, this year in particular, they're good against quarterbacks. They were good against quarterbacks last year. And the Cowboys against the Lions, that's going to be a shootout. That's going to be a great matchup. But still, dude, it's one of those things that if I have Josh Allen, there's just no way that I'm benching him. There's just no way that I'm benching him. If you want to swing for the absolute fences and you're trying to hit a grand slam on one pitch, you can go with Dak Prescott. I wouldn't argue with you. If you came to me and said, hey, man, I'm going with Dak over Josh Allen this week, I'd be like, whew, go get him, man. Good luck. Oh, JT's ruled out, so that totally helps. I'm so sorry, guys, that I'm behind on the news. I'll do better next Friday at reading up on this stuff. I'm telling you, once Thursday night hits, I unplug. I just need a breather, get away from fantasy football and NFL for a minute here. JT ruled out, so that's a great sign for Trey Sermon. Should I start Trey Sermon or Bucky, or should I drop Sermon and pick up one of Spears, Bigsby, Tyron Tracy? Listen, I'll say this. If Tank Bigsby and Tyjae Spears are available and you have any sort of bench space, I would grab one of those guys for sure. They shouldn't be available. They should be rostered. Tyron Tracy should be rostered too, but I understand that you can't just roster everybody. Sermon or Bucky? Man, like I said, I just don't love Bucky this week, but I don't love Trey Sermon either. I like Sermon is a much better bet to be of this batch of players you've given me. Trey Sermon is the best bet to get volume. Bucky Irving should get volume. Tank Bigsby, we're hoping gets the same volume. It has not been consistent. There's risk there. Tyrone Tracy, if Singletary plays, I don't know about that either. I'm totally fine with rolling the dice on Trey Sermon. You just got to temper expectations a bit. There's not any one of these players. Here's what I'll say. If you're trying to swing for the fences and aim for absolute upside, I would go with Tank Bigsby. If you're just trying to go safety, quote unquote, guaranteed points, it's probably Trey Sermon. He's the best bet to get 15 touches. They used him a lot in the passing game last week, which is a good sign. Granted, that was Joe Flacco, not Anthony Richardson, but Sermon is going to be the safer play. Just to be really clear, I don't there's none of these options that are that's the guy. That is the one that I want. They're all I can't say 51, 49%, but it'd be 25, 25, 25, 25, something like that. But if it were me and I'm looking for safety, I'm probably going Trey Sermon. If I went up against Kenneth Walker or something like that and I need to swing for the fences, give me Tank Bigsby and let it ride and just hope it, be prepared to swallow a really low score from Tank Bigsby. But if you're swinging for the fences, I'd be going Tank there. Who wins 2v2? Cousins and Pitts or Hurts and Goddard? What do you mean 2v2? Wait, I don't know if I understand the question. Is it in a wrestling match? No, I'm just kidding. Terrible joke. I mean, I would be going Hurts, and if this is fantasy football, I'd be going Hurts and Goddard. But man, I mean, Kyle Pitts, whatever. We gotta wrap it up. I can't get started on Kyle Pitts, but yeah. Anyway, I'd pick Hurts and Goddard on that one. Wicks or Slayton PPR? Wicks for me. I love that shootout. I love his opportunity. Slayton did well, but they're getting about the same amount of volume. But Wicks has a better quarterback, a similar matchup and a high scoring game. I'd be going Wicks there for sure. Big Mellow, would you sit Mike Evans and play Josh Downs? I would not do that. Not if Anthony Richardson is playing football. I would not do that. I have Tank Dell. Big Mellow wants to know. I have Tank Dell and CD for my other two. Yeah, I mean, either way, I'm going. Give me Mike Evans. I mean, listen, he has in his career he has struggled against New Orleans. I jokingly said in the Discord server. Again, I'm telling you guys, you got to join the Discord server. Can't remember where it was, but I jokingly said, wait, somebody said pass on the Seahawks uniforms yesterday. That's wild. I thought the Seahawks uniforms are bangers. Here it is. Over under 1.5 quarters until Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore get into a fist fight. That was a joke. But dude, Evans has just not been good against the New Orleans Saints in his career. And Chris Godwin has been the main beneficiary of that, but still, Josh Downs is hurt. Well, so is Michael Pittman. Okay, hold on now. Yeah, I don't know. You can't bench Mike Evans. Not here. You can't bench Mike Evans here. Laporta or Goddard? Man, I mean, so Goddard is actually at the very tippy top of the touchdown regression cheat sheet. I mean, the dude has 301 yards, but no touchdowns. Like, mathematically, something's got to give there. There's got to be a touchdown coming at some point. But yeah, I mean, it's the sort of thing where it's like the Eagles won't have to throw the ball too much. They're 2-score favorites. The Browns are tough against tight ends. I'd have a really tough time benching Sam Laporta. I know he hasn't done much, but I can't bench Sam Laporta in this game. 52.5 point over 27 plus point implied total. We saw what Sam Laporta is capable. Like, we know his ceiling. He hasn't done it yet this year, but we know what Sam Laporta can do. I would have a really, really difficult time benching Sam Laporta in this game. I'd be going Sam Laporta here, and I'd feel good about it. All right, guys, that is going to do it. That is going to be all we have time for today. Hopefully 2 hours and 11 minutes was enough for you. But anyway, I hope you guys found this helpful. Come back every single Friday at noon Central. We're going to do this in week 7, week 8, week 9, possibly not week 10. I have whatever. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But yeah, come back every Friday, noon Central, Basement Brood Fantasy Football YouTube channel. The next time you see me will most likely be on Tuesday morning. I always do a short little waiver wire episode. And guys, I can't ask enough. If you like the heat map, what you saw today, what I use to make these decisions, it's $5. It's $4.99 to get week 6. Or like I mentioned, you can get the remainder of the 2024 season for just $44.99. I'm going to one last time drop the link in the comments. Patreon.com/basementbroodff. Again, this is the resource that started my entire company. This is the resource that led to me quitting my corporate career because it blew up on Reddit. I had people in my DMs just randomly asking for my Venmo so that they could donate to use the tool. I cannot recommend giving this comment or giving this, I say comment because I'm trying to hide this one. Giving this tool, giving this resource a try. Even if it's just one time, give week 6 a try. If you've tried it in the past, thank you. I really appreciate it. If you tuned in today, thank you. I really appreciate it. Like I said, guys, I can't emphasize enough how difficult it is to build a business, to make sales, to find subscribers, to build an audience. So for those of you who have tuned in and you've been tuned in and you've been with me for years, I can't thank you enough. But I think that's it. I think I'm ready for beer number 2. Again, it's 2:00 on a Friday in Milwaukee, and I've only had one beer. I'm about 5 behind the rest of my city mates, and I need to get to it. So beer time after I stop in the bathroom. Thank you again for tuning in. I will see you Tuesday morning. Best of luck in week 6. I will see you on the fantasy football field, and I hope to see you in our fantasy football Discord server. Cheers. This brew's for you.